Welcome back, committee members. Mr. Trent Weatherspoon has joined us this afternoon, and Minister Morgan, and welcome to the officials from SaskTel. This afternoon we will be considering the annual reports for SaskTel and the annual reports and the Provincial Auditors chapter for CIC. We will now begin our consideration on the annual reports and financial statements of SaskTel and subsidiaries. This includes the 2019, 2020, 2020-21 SaskTel annual reports, Saskatchewan Telecommunications financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Saskatchewan Telecommunications International financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Direct West Corporation financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Secure Tech Monitoring Solutions, Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, and Saskatchewan Telecommunications Pension Plan Annual Report and financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. I'd like to welcome Minister Morgan. Can you please introduce your officials and make your comments, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to be here to discuss reports for the past two fiscal years, 2019-20 and 2020-21. With me are some senior officials from SaskTel. Today I'm joined by Doug Burnett, President and CEO, Charlene Gavel, Chief Financial Officer, Doug Kozlowski, Vice President, Corporate Counsel and Regulatory Affairs, Scott Smith, Senior Director of Finance, and Michelle Englot, Director of Corporate and Government Relations. As well, I'm joined by Charles Reed, Senior Ministerial Assistant from my office here. These officials will be available to answer any questions you may have. However, before we get to that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make some introductory remarks on SaskTel's financial performance and other highlights for the past 2 years. Then we'll certainly be prepared to answer any questions from the committee. Every annual report is intended to provide a snapshot of the year, and at SaskTel, the company has been able to ensure strong, sustainable growth over the past 2 years, while also delivering on their strategic purpose to be the best at connecting people to their world. Even with ongoing industry pressures and the collective uncertainty posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, SaskTel continued to provide exceptional customer experiences and delivered beyond expectations during the past 2 years. In the year ending March 31st, 2020, SaskTel reported a net income of $119.8 million, A year later, on March 31st, 2021, their annual net income had increased to $130.8 million. SaskTel's senior leadership and province-wide team of employees are at the center of these accomplishments. Even while learning to work in new ways and carrying on operations remotely during the worst days of the pandemic, SaskTel employees continue to build relationships in the community and made significant progress in strengthening SaskTel's world-class networks. SaskTel also stood by their customers with passion and commitment. At a time when residents needed connectivity the most, SaskTel provided critical assistance and ensured customers could stay connected even as work routines and personal lives became disrupted. During the first wave, SaskTel waived data overage charges for all customers on their postpaid wireless plans, no strings prepaid plans, and Fusion Internet plans. Complimentary TV channels and free content were also provided to Max TV customers to help them stay entertained while at home. SaskTel also took steps to provide financial relief to those impacted either by job loss or other COVID-related impacts. In 2020, disconnections due to non-payment were halted for several months. Late payment fees were also waived temporarily. In terms of hard figures, just to show how impactful the past 2 years have been, I'd like to provide some of the most interesting and attesting numbers. I believe that these figures also paint a vivid picture of what is in store for SaskTel as an industry player in the months and years to come. As of March 31st, 2021, SaskTel counted an additional 40,386 broadband internet customer connections, representing year-over-year growth of 5.1%. On SaskTel's fiber optic infinite network, there were 18,000 additional subscribers, representing subscriber growth of 14% year-over-year. Lastly, SaskTel reported expanded revenue and customer growth in their wireless services. In this ultra-competitive sector, SaskTel welcomed an additional 15,031 new wireless subscribers between 2019-20 and 2020-21, representing a positive growth of 2.4%. SaskTel also continued to have the lowest customer churn rates and highest lifetime revenue for wireless services in Canada. SaskTel landline telephone service subscriptions did continue to decline, a trend observed nationally as more people shift to wireless as their sole communication source. On this point, we know that SaskTel's wireless infrastructure, especially in our rural areas, will continue to grow in importance. In this vein, we are pleased to mark the conclusion of the Wireless Saskatchewan initiative, which has become a true achievement for SaskTel. First announced in 2017, the initiative resulted in a total investment of over $107 million into rural services, resulting in construction of 105 community sites, 89 macro towers, and 34 new fusion sites, and improved cellular data capacity for some of SaskTel's busiest resort sites. SaskTel's wireless network now comprises over 1,000 wireless sites, including 700 in rural Saskatchewan alone. During the last 2 fiscal years, SaskTel also pursued a number of other large capital projects to meet rapidly changing customer needs. Following a province-wide project that started in 2018, SaskTel upgraded several aspects of their DSL network, allowing significant speed upgrades in communities across the province. As a result, SaskTel brought speeds up to 50 megabits per second to thousands of new households. SaskTel's generational fiber optic build to bring their blazing fast infinite network into more communities also turned a new page in 2020 with the start of their rural fiber initiative. With a grand total investment over $100 million, this multi-phase initiative will bring SaskTel's fiber optic service to approximately 60,000 households and businesses in more than 40 rural Saskatchewan communities by the end of 2023. Internally, SaskTel continues to transform and adopt digital innovations to improve their operations and deliver better customer service experiences. As they work to implement their own digital transformation, I believe it is also worthwhile to point out the headways they have made in building and fostering a vast partner ecosystem across the province. As highlighted by the Melfort Smart City Initiative, partnerships with organizations such as Saskatchewan's Green Wave Innovations have succeeded in bringing attention to homegrown, leading-edge products and solutions that can help municipalities as well as local businesses reach their goals. Through the past 2 reporting periods, SaskTel's investments have been strategic and forward-thinking to ensure that they, as a provider, stay ahead of the demand curve for new services and technologies. In 2020-21, SaskTel invested an additional $308.2 million in capital expenditures, an increase of over $45 million from 2019-20. These investments will go far to create opportunities for additional enhancements and capabilities in the future, especially as 5G is rolled out on the provincial network. SaskTel has continued to show what it means to deliver for its customers. Looking ahead, the company is well positioned to continue driving compelling returns for our province. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, I conclude my opening remarks, and we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Minister. Do any members have any questions? Mr. Witherspoon?
Chair, thanks, Minister, and our President and CEO that's joined us, and the team from SaskTel. It's a pleasure to have some time here with you this afternoon, and to you and through you, I just say thanks to your entire team and that amazing staff team across the province with SaskTel. It's an incredible company. It's one that's a Crown corporation that we're all proud of, and we thank you for your stewardship and leadership and work within it. It was, the value of those Crown corporations, and certainly SaskTel, was put on full display during this pandemic this year, and their ability to respond and provide some relief at times of incredible stress, uncertainty, and hardship for many people and many businesses across Saskatchewan. And we're all thankful for the ability to do so. So thanks for that. We'll get into some of the questions here for the Minister. What costs, if any, were incurred by SaskTel for the proposed rebrand that came to light in the media reports in the last number of weeks?
Mr. Chair, I don't know whether the member was aware of the announcements or the things that took place yesterday in committee. I had indicated for the record that shortly after I took the portfolio, we were approached by SGI as well as 2 other Crowns to consider looking at rebranding or a different visual identity program going forward. I indicated at that time that we felt it was appropriate that we should look at the requests that were coming forward and see whether there was any merit to them and whether there was any potential benefits for the Crowns to tie to the strengths of the province and vice versa. The Crowns in our province are closely integrated with the province because they're wholly owned by the taxpayers of the province. So we had some internal discussion, and then we asked the Crowns to have a look at what the costs might be and what they felt the benefits might be. Some of the replies came back as indicating replacing signage, replacing letterhead, etc. In some cases, such as Sask Energy, the logo is used on valves and stuff on pumping stations, and there would be an enormous cost to replace all of them. I don't think it was anything that was ever contemplated that would ever get to the point where they would look at replacing valve handles. But the discussion came to the point where we felt, given the current situation of the province with the pandemic, it was not the message that we wanted to send to citizens of the province. So we've indicated to all of the Crowns that we're putting this on pause, and we'll go forward with it or look and see where we want to go at some point in the future. But we've asked them not to do any further work on it. SaskTel was one of the ones that did not have any kind of a branding process underway or any requests that were there. So my understanding is that they spent zero money on it, and no money has been spent, nor will it be.
So I would suspect that there was some energy and time that would have been taken up within the organization and the staff within it. Certainly that all comes at a cost as well. Do you have an estimate of the cost on that front?
There was no additional cost. I mean, it was time spent by people within the organization that were there on salary, and no additional time was logged or any additional expense.
Just again, any of the time they're spending is, they're getting paid for that work, so it's they're getting compensated, and they're spending that time and energy there as opposed to other areas. So there's certainly some cost to it. My question relates back to your comments that SaskTel had SGI and 2 other crowns come to it. Could you just describe those other 2 crowns and what that sequence of sort of who led that?
I was the first one to come forward, indicating they wanted to go through a fairly extensive rebranding exercise. As you're likely aware, SGI was originally SGIO when it was the Saskatchewan Government Insurance Office, and I don't know why that was ever called out in the first place. And then over the years, it had gone through a number of brandings and logo changes, and they actually came forward with what the things were, and it was things that I remembered from previous phone books and that, they felt it was worthwhile for them to consider where they were because they do business elsewhere other than in Saskatchewan. So anyway, they came forward with it. The other ones were Sask Gaming Corporation, who indicated they wanted to look at it in the context of their renovations that had been done at Casino Regina and Casino Moose Jaw, and where they would go with that. So those things, as those casinos open, they may choose to use, for whatever business reasons, different signage or whatever to reflect the new investments that were there. And then CIC indicated that they felt it was appropriate for them to do an update moving on. For CIC, the cost for them to do an update or something on their logo is virtually negligible because they don't have vehicles, they don't have external signs or anything, but we've asked them to pause it there as well.
So the other entities were Sask Gaming and CIC. Now you mentioned Sask Energy and sort of the costs.
Apologize. It was SGI and SGC and CIC.
When you referenced Sask Energy, did you mention, I thought you mentioned something about the gas distribution system and a tag that...
And we asked what the costs might be or where they were at. They indicated, a long list of things where signage would have to be changed. It's not just a sign on the building and change on the letterhead. They would indicate the cost on vehicles, and their logo is on all of their equipment as well. So as you could say, well, we'll change it as equipment rolls out, but they just indicated, to go down into the changing everywhere that had the existing Sask Energy logo would become complex.
And I assume Sask Power, what's your take? It would be a similar kind of massive cost, I would assume, just in how embedded that logo is in much of the infrastructure across the province?
I don't have, it would have been a significant cost. When you recall, when we changed government, we made somewhat of a change from the wheat sheaf to the crown logo, and that was done at low or no cost because it was done over time as letterhead expired, whatever, and it wasn't on vehicles to a great number of cents, but where it was on a vehicle, it was done as the vehicle rolled out or was replaced. So I think that was what was initially contemplated as something that was there, but having talked to the crowns, it was certainly far more in depth than what a person might initially think.
And I guess there was a rebrand that occurred at SaskTel in 2016. It didn't require significant, like you weren't changing logos and all these sorts of things. So the rebrand that you're looking at here would be significantly more expensive. Have you been? I don't
know whether I'd say that it would be or wouldn't be. We hadn't gone to the point of deciding how in depth or what it might look like. What it was a discussion about what the benefits might be to the crowns to be closer aligned, to have a common visual identity. And, we're doing a lot of work right now on crown collaboration, working with individual crowns to work together to mark underground services locations together to do common buying, to work together on a variety of those things. And the discussion was, well, would a common visual identity further those ends? In any event, it was clear that it was more complex and would become expensive, so we stopped it at an early stage.
Certainly, I can imagine the cost being, really significant. What have you learned from SaskTel or from the other crowns with respect to the value of their brands? Because of course they manage that, they have expertise, that relationship with the province is really important. People identify our crowns at a very high level and value our crowns at a very high level. What have you learned around the risks in some sort of homogenous, brand that doesn't allow the unique relationship that's been built with each one of those crowns, like SaskTel with Saskatchewan people?
What I would say is that we should never be afraid to ask, to question, to look for things to get better, to look for improvements, to look to taking our crowns to a newer level. Over the last number of years, we've reduced overhead at the crowns. We've through attrition, reduced a lot of the Crown's employee numbers. We're providing continually increasing quality of service, and I think those are the things that we want to do. And I think we should never be afraid to ask Crowns questions about how we can do things better, how best we can market the Crowns, and how best we can retain the competitive edge of the Crowns. SaskTel, which is before us today, is the one Crown that every aspect of its business, it has a private sector competitor, whether it's SaskTel Max, SecureTech, or whatever other service that is there. There are one or more private sector carriers on there. So naturally, I think we want to be mindful of how that's done and how best we can serve that end. So I think I would thank the Crowns for their work, their consideration in providing us information.
Just mentioned that one of the goals with the Crowns and for one like SaskTel, from your perspective, is to reduce jobs by way of attrition. Could you speak to your interest in reducing the number of jobs?
I think SaskTel and the rest of the Crowns focus on competent professional workforce. They work hard to maintain services. In a lot of cases, as the province continues to grow, the need for Crown services will continue to grow. And we've asked the Crowns to look at what an appropriate employee makeup is. They work with CIC to do that, and then we've asked them where they choose to make reductions is to have targets that are set by and with CIC to use attrition to do it or relocate people. And that's the process that's taken place.
So do you feel there's too many people working at SaskTel right now?
I
guess so, if that's the here.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any undertakings to reduce staff or make changes right now. I think it's a process that took place a number of years ago, and I think they did a competent and professional job on doing that. So I don't think I want to make comments as to what a right level is. I think they'll work with CIC and work with their board of directors to try and determine a good process to determine how the staffing should be done.
I just found it passing strange that you would reference as part of the goals would be to reduce employment numbers.
I don't think I would take that. I think what you're doing is taking something out of context and taking something in isolation. I think what the purpose of it is and should be is to try and use make the most efficient use of tax dollars that you possibly can.
So with respect to then the reductions that you're speaking of around employment, often what we've seen with your government is that you cut the civil servant's job or the Crown worker's job, but then that work is outsourced or privatized. Could you speak to that? You're speaking that you've had this mandate and this mission to reduce jobs out of SaskTel, but often what we've seen in the other cases is that it hasn't been a cost saver because, of course, there's been all these contracts that have been let, and we've seen that in ministries proper, and we've seen it in Crown corporations as well. If you could speak specific to that experience in SaskTel around the growth in private contracts, while you're presiding over a push to reduce employment at the Crown Corp.
it's a push to reduce unemployment in and of itself. I think it's appropriate to say as the company becomes more technologically advanced, do you need the same makeup of people, and are you able to do things in a better or more efficient way? There certainly is no push to try and privatize or to contract out. When SaskTel does work, the direction that's given is you try and use in-house staff or existing staff, and then where there's been a large mandate to try and do other projects, if you have to contract work, then you would be at liberty to do that if you're unable to locate staff from within. And the examples I would give you are where we've done additional work with regard to adding cell phone towers, increasing connectivity for fiber in various neighborhoods. That's done by the staff at SaskTel, who, by the way, are competent professional, but in a number of cases over the years where the workload, and because it's seasonal, we've had to use outside contractors as well.
Well, certainly this is, an area of concern, I think, for Saskatchewan people. We need to ensure, I think, that high-quality employment for folks, and we need to make sure that the capacity is there for an exceptional crown like SaskTel. And certainly you're quite right about making sure that a workforce and the expertise, is in line with the evolution of that crown, that tech company, as in many ways as you describe. But it's, and the minister will know that we've had long-standing concerns with what was seemed to be sort of a real focus on, what they said were cutting jobs, but then contracting those out often at a higher cost. So that'll be something that we'll want to continue to track closely by your government and specific to your interventions. With respect to the rebranding,
I want to engage in debate. I mean, you left a sort of a statement on the record that was rather critical of our relationship with the Crown and with the employees at the Crown, and I would take issue with that. We work hard to respect and value the individuals that are there. I can tell you that in the period of time since 2007, there's been very minimal labor disruptions at any of the Crowns. We're talking labor disruptions measured in hours or days. We continue to work and respect the collective bargaining process. We continue to respect and value the work that are done by those employees, both individually and collectively. That's something that I, as Labour Minister, value greatly, and I take strong exception with you making a remark that would put that into question, because it's something that is simply not true.
Well, I think folks,
you can ask your questions.
Folks certainly identify. You spoke about
you can ask your questions, and we will certainly answer your questions. But if you want to make a statement that you choose to put on the record, I'm not going to stand idly by and leave that statement go by without an answer. You may choose to make it, but expect an answer.
Sure. Fair enough. And the minister identified that reducing employment was part of the focus. That was
I know that it's leadership season coming up again for your party. I'd ask you to set aside your leadership aspirations. They haven't done you well in the past, and I'd ask you this time to focus on the issues before SaskTel and not focus on attacking the individuals within the management or within the ministry that are trying to do an effective job at delivering service to the people in this province.
Don't get too worked up or emotional when you present something at the committee and then we ask for clarification. And I would never do anything but heap praise on the leadership of those at SaskTel and all those within the organization. As a matter of point, though, when you're going back to talk about what a great steward you were of this crown, of course, it was 2016, 2017 that you were engaged in meetings to sell off a portion of that crown. And I certainly know that didn't sit very well with the workers of that Crown Corporation or the people of Saskatchewan. But let's, for the benefit of Saskatchewan people, and I don't need then any more shots about my failed leadership attempts by the good minister here. I know them all too well. But we'll adjust.
Time being to set all of those issues aside.
What I'd like to adjust to is you did say that you're going to pause this rebranding effort. Why pause? Why is this still an active or a file that's of consideration when you've shared what you have around the concerns and the costs when I believe that our Crown corporations ultimately are best positions to be making those decisions themselves.
There may be a time sometime down the road where circumstances may change. Individual Crowns may come back with another request. We know that Sask Government Insurance has got requests that are there, and that may be something to look at. But we've asked all of the Crowns to take no further steps and to spend no further money.
No, thanks for that. I think it should be shelved as any sort of central government initiative. I think our Crowns really do need to make sure that their marketing teams, that they're engaged. They know that relationship. They keep that data. They assess these things, and they're exceptional at doing so. Well, with respect to that whole initiative, you're talking about the two Crowns, the SGI, and then the other two Crowns. What role did CIC play in that? We also, I know, have CIC up for considerations, their annual reports in a little bit, so maybe you want to defer answering that. We can follow up that line of questioning there.
What is your question about CIC?
Just what role did CIC play in the in this whole rebrand initiative?
Mr. Skorpa?
I'm asking that the member opposite keep the questioning to the matter at hand, that being the annual reports.
Okay, let's get back online of the topics of order, and let's be respectful of manner of questioning and answering. My expectations as the chair is that members, permanent and committee members, do their utmost to be cordial and respectful and keep a productive atmosphere here, please. So if we can move on to the point at hand, CIC is up next, so let's move forward.
So just to, we can follow up with the CIC question. Certainly I put it forward in good faith in just understanding the sequence of considerations and who the different actors were, and we can pursue that line of questioning when CIC is up. And so I appreciate that. With respect to, and this is, I hope a straightforward, simple exchange. I referenced, the sell-off conversations in the past. In the past, we have two annual reports before us here. In that period of time, can you describe any activity that was looking to sell off a portion of that Crown or a significant private sort of stake or partnership or an equity stake in SaskTel?
None that I'm aware of.
None that you're aware of?
I was not privy to giving any direction or receiving any requests from any requests to sell off any portion of it.
Moving along a little bit, one of the things that the Crowns were really helpful with during this pandemic was, of course, ensuring service. And SaskTel, really rose to the occasion as kids were, pushed home for school out of safety to ensure their safety. SaskTel really stepped up, around overage and ensuring access to data. And having an interest in in making sure, to some extent with school boards to ensure that the digital divide to some extent was addressed. Another component of that was the actual cost. Of course, a whole bunch of folks through that pandemic had their employment disrupted, their income disrupted, and were facing significant hardship. So the deferrals of the bills was an important program. We're thankful for it. One of the things that we've been troubled to learn kind of coming through this, and I understand that maybe it was a bit of a long-standing aspect with respect to sort of the late payments that exist, but the interest rate seems to be incredibly high for those that are late in their payment and for those deferred payment programs. Could we just get some clarity as to the interest rates that those with late bills or that participated in that deferral program were subjected or are subjected to?
Gladly. So during COVID, which for us really started, I guess, in kind of March of 2020, we almost immediately implemented an interest deferral program and a collection deferral program. So from March until September of 2020, we did not charge any interest or take any collection action against any accounts. So for at least that period of COVID, no additional interest was charged. And then following that, from September of 2020 to September of 2021, anybody who had arrears that accrued during that period of time then had the option to participate in the Crown Interest Deferral Program, which allowed those folks to again put together a payment plan that would work for them over the course of a year and continue not to pay any interest on any of the debt that they may have accumulated during the COVID period or for a year after while they paid that back.
For the year after, and then what's the rate after that? Is that a standard rate for kind of all the late payments? What is that rate?
It is a standard rate. I'd have to ask our CFO what the rate itself is. Might just take a minute to give you the actual rate.
Also, the sort of the complexity that it's there. There's the different services have different interest rates. So Ms. Gavel is there, so I will let her provide the specifics.
Yeah, Charlene Gavel, Chief Financial Officer. The monthly rate for overdue accounts is 3%.
And now the minister referenced some different categories or different programs. Are there other programs with balances that are owing that have different interest rates that are applied to them?
For all three.
Okay.
Just double check that the wireline and the wireless were both the same, and they are. They're both at 3%.
Right. 3% monthly.
Monthly.
Yeah. The what's the trend here right now with respect to the outstanding accounts, both those that would be attributed to the deferral program and then those that aren't within that program?
Doug, did you want to take that, or do you want me to? Okay, thank you.
Just in terms of overdue accounts receivable for 2021, at the end of the year, the accounts receivable was actually down fairly significantly, probably by about 40%. And that's understandable, of course, because during that time we weren't charging interest and we weren't taking action. So it is, I can tell you, so for 1920, the year prior to when COVID really started, we would have written off approximately $7.6 million in accounts, whereas for 2021, we wrote off $4.9 million, so significantly less. Most of those accounts, I suspect, were already in arrears prior to COVID coming, and that this was just a carry-on effect, and that the deficiency is likely the amount that went into kind of deferral during COVID, that we now have given those customers the opportunity to pay back over the next year.
The rate itself is high, right? Of course, SaskTel's been good at sort of having programs and work with customers. I know that it's one of the values of our Crown corporations in general, and something that people value, that they can build out a schedule to repay and whatnot. But 3% monthly really does add up, and that's a high cost for a bill. Is this something that's being considered? I suspect it's a low revenue item for SaskTel, but it's certainly a challenging situation for those that are caught up in the impacts of work loss and income loss this last year. And many of those folks are also dealing with exorbitant interests, that they may have incurred through other debt during that period of hardship as well. Is this something? I know we've called for this rate to be addressed because I think it's one of those things that just doesn't need to, cause undue financial hardship to those coming out of this unprecedented situation. Is there consideration on this front?
So I can tell you, first, I think I would acknowledge it is a high interest rate, but it is certainly industry standard. So SaskTel is not alone. In terms of the other 3 or 4 large players in the industry, this percentage would be very consistent with what they charge. We do, as you can see, where we think that the individual circumstances warrant, we do find ways to be compassionate and to help, and in instances like this, even waive some of those charges and waive some of the charges for different services. So we are mindful to the needs of our customers. We are very respectful of providing them with an appropriate level of service, certainly not interested in penalizing them. It is, at the end of the day, a discretionary service, although I would say it's becoming maybe less discretionary. It is one, though, that folks, can move to competitors with. And so there are different alternatives available for those who simply choose not to pay for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think most people want to pay back what's owed, and sort of, are defer in good faith. It just I would just leave it with more the minister. I think that SaskTel's been so exceptional in responding to the challenges of the people of the province this last year, and a lot of those folks that lost jobs and were without income and that have deferred bills like this, if they're still struggling to pay them back, I'll bet this isn't the only bill that they're trying to pay back. And knowing that this is a very modest revenue item for the province, and in fact, even losing that customer would be really unfortunate in the long term. I would urge the minister to be thinking about addressing this high interest as folks are still dealing with those economic hits from the last year.
Appreciate the comments being made by the member. SaskTel is a service where the costs are borne by all of the citizens of the province. So I think it's a matter of trying to find an appropriate balance as to what's fair to the individuals that have gone through the financial problems caused by the pandemic. We've asked SaskTel to make good business decisions and use industry practices. We did weigh in and direct them to use the waiver on interest charges and on overage charges during those periods of time, and then we asked them to do it again later on. We'll urge them to have a compassionate approach going forward, and the member's point's well taken.
Thanks very much. Maybe moving along a little bit, we talked a little bit in that last exchange about how invaluable the service, of being able to connect is for people by way of, their daily lives and even safety and security. Connectivity really does matter. It's critical to economic opportunities, both for a person and for a region and a community. And connecting Saskatchewan needs to be a real priority. I know that SaskTel is doing sort of everything it can towards connecting Saskatchewan within its resources. I guess this is an area where I just would like to hear and focus in a little bit more, a bit of an update on those, the whole Connecting Saskatchewan project, reiteration that this really needs to be a priority. I know that that's identified as a priority by the leadership of SaskTel. And maybe just to start off into that, to the minister who plays a role in impeding some of this progress is the dividend policy that relates directly to SaskTel. I think if you look at that crown and its economic fundamentals and the important project of connecting Saskatchewan, that it's a time where that dividend policy needs to be reviewed. Of course, the minister's familiar with my call to be reducing that dividend or eliminating that dividend and enabling that capital to be directed and deployed with a real hurry-up offense in connecting Saskatchewan, working with partners, working with the good recommendations that are coming in, certainly through SaskTel and through stakeholders like the agricultural producers of Saskatchewan who've done some good work on this front. But an important piece of that is making sure they have the capital, the dollars to do that. So I guess just to the minister, are you actively reviewing the dividend for SaskTel, contemplating change on this front to make sure that we can really, prioritize connecting Saskatchewan?
We do not want the dividend or the return to the shareholders or the citizens of the province to be a factor in how we would fund expansion through SaskTel. I think the one thing that you and I will agree on is we want to see greater connectivity and more availability for access in rural Saskatchewan. You referenced the comments made by APAS, and I agree with those. Those are something that's there. SaskTel will advise you in an answer to the next question that if we were to provide fiber to every residence in the province south of the tree line, the cost would be approximately $7.2 billion. So it's not a matter of simply of adjusting a dividend amount. It goes far deeper, and it means a matter of trying to find better and other methods of trying to reach the various residents and businesses across the province. And I agree with you. It is absolutely something that is critical, and the direction that we've given to SaskTel is come back, do more homework, come back with more options. We directed SaskTel to find money for additional cell phone towers, and as you're aware, we now have 1,000 plus cell phone towers in the province, and we'll continue to try and build that out. The CEO will talk about the fusion plans and the other programs that are there. But I would like to just sort of put it out that the cost to try and do fiber, which is regarded as the best process, is certainly something that's probably beyond what should be done as an entirely provincial initiative, and there may have to be other options that people might want to consider. But anyway, we appreciate the point you're making about wanting to have rural connectivity, and I think I agree with you. I do not want to let the dividend policy interfere with that in any way. And if it means, as we've done with some other crowns, that we transfer money to the GRF as we did with SaskPower, we would look at options that we would do the same to try and make sure that whatever was necessary to allow SaskTel to, and as you're aware, there's a good debt equity ratio there now. So anyway, I'll let Mr. Burnett give you a bit of background on what has been taking place, and there's no doubt more needs to be done.
Sure. Thanks, Minister. For a number of years, we've been very focused on driving high-speed broadband deeper and deeper into rural locations, while at the same time increasing the speed and capacity of that same service in communities and cities. And there's really 4 different technologies that we've used to do it, and I kind of need to walk through each one to give you a good sense of some of the work that's been going on. But if I start with the traditional copper network, our DSL network, that is a service that takes broadband service into approximately 463 communities in the province. And over the last number of years, we have increased the capacity and the speed with which it can bring that service from 5, 10, up to 50 megabits per second. Now, 50 megabits per second certainly pales, I think, in comparison to some of the numbers you hear from fiber. But what we are finding is, first of all, the 50 megabits per second is the CRTC standard that they are asking provinces and providers to make available to customers by 2030. So we're a long way down the road to providing the service that is mandated by the CRTC on that service. We also provide DSL or high speed through our wireless service, through cellular. And as you know, over the last 3 or 4 years, we have implemented a wireless Saskatchewan program, committed $107 million to that program. And under that program, we added an additional 43 fusion towers to the system. So we have a system that provides kind of deep rural, but not individual farms, but outside of communities, that is referred to as fusion. It's a fixed radio network, so it goes to a tower, but then through the air to individuals' houses. It covers some 700 communities in the province. Now that technology is only good enough to provide 10 megabits per second, and it is on our radar as we change from over to our 5G gear to upgrade that to be able to significantly increase the speeds and the coverage. So it will potentially be a real asset in terms of improving broadband coverage in rural areas, short of getting to the $7 billion solution that the minister mentioned. And then, of course, on top of that, we also have a fiber solution. And again, you'll be familiar with the fact that since 2012, we have embarked on a program of installing fiber. First, it was in the 9 major centres. We have since expanded that to many bedroom communities, then to some of the smaller communities. And you may know that just last year we announced a $50 million program to expand it to a further 20 communities. These communities keep getting smaller and smaller, and as you'll appreciate, it's more and more difficult to put a business case together for that. And then just this spring, with the minister's assistant, we have announced another $50 million, bringing the total rural broadband program to $100 million, whereby we will install fiber over the course of the next 2 years to approximately 42 of the smaller communities around the province. So a huge step forward. And then we will continue to look at other communities where we can find appropriate solutions to improve the coverage. Then as part of that initiative, we also undertook an RFI program, which was a request for information from potential suppliers to either become vendors to SaskTel, contractors to SaskTel to actually build the network to allow us to build some of these out quicker, or to those vendors that wanted to build and operate their own network. And if they were interested in building and operating their own network, SaskTel would commit to give them a 2-year hiatus where SaskTel would commit not to compete, not to build. So just to give them enough of a assurance that they could potentially get in as a first goer and maybe get their feet on the ground and establish it. Again, this was an attempt to see, are there other ways that we can help build out the province and improve high-speed internet deeper and deeper into some of our rural communities, recognizing that we have capacity restraints and that some of these folks can potentially do it cheaper than SaskTel can do it. So that we're right in the middle of evaluating those submissions. That just closed it a couple weeks ago, and we will work with those that submitted applications to build and operate to see if there is a model that would work kind of in tandem with what we do. Now, there's nothing that stops anybody from going to build. We have lots of internet service providers in the province that simply go build a province without any assurances. The benefit of this program is that if they wanted to work with us and coordinate with us, they would stay out of the communities that we've already committed to build in, and in exchange they could build in communities with the assurance that we wouldn't go there for a couple of years. So that type of an approach.
I would add 2 other things to that. As they go through the build-out, they will use, to the extent they can, SaskTel workers, but there's no doubt they will have to use some external contract workers to do some of the installations. The other point I would make is the demand for bandwidth has increased and continues to increase. The CEO talked about the 5010, which at one time is regarded as sort of the gold standard. But if you have 5010 into your house and you do a speed test, you won't find 5010 there anymore, because you'll find out, oh, well, somebody in the basement is watching Netflix, somebody else is being a gamer, there are 3 other people that are net surfing, so all of a sudden you're getting 12.2 or something far less. So as the demand increases, the goal of SaskTel has to be to try and increase to meet the demand. And I think that's a great thing, but it really poses an additional challenge to them, because if they've talked about it being 5010, and then people go out and do the installation and find out that it's significantly less. So I think that's their goal, is to try and work to continue to do that.
The last technology that I didn't spend much time on is the mobile network itself. And it's available to 99% of the population of the province. We recognize that in some areas the service from that is either unacceptable or not available. And so as part of the $107 million Wireless Saskatchewan initiative, we did put up an additional 89 macro towers. Those are the large 300-meter towers that you see out in the community. They'll cover a radius of about 18 square miles. So those aren't intended for just small communities. And they are about $1 million a tower. In addition to that, we also put up another 105 what we called small towers. They were 100-foot towers, and they are located in some of the very small communities that we thought had the poorest service. Those towers will reach a radius of about 6 kilometers. So they not only help the community itself, but anybody who lived within a 6-kilometer radius. So through that program, we will have significantly, and by the way, if you happen to go into any of those communities and talk to the residents, they are receiving super fast speeds. So I think they're very happy with those small towers. So through the $107 million program, which by the way has come to an end this year, where the last tower is just being erected, we, I believe, have significantly improved the coverage. And as the Minister mentioned, that takes us to about 1,000 towers, cell towers, in the province. The next closest provider that has cell towers here is Rogers, and they'd be roughly 260 towers in the province, just by way of comparison. So those are the kinds of things that we have on the go for improving high speed in the province. And certainly we are, over the next couple of years, very focused on continuing to expand and improve that service.
Yeah, I appreciate all the efforts and the fulsome update as well. The 100-foot towers, the smaller ones that are being deployed, what's the cost of those ones to be installed?
They're about $120,000 a tower.
Now that tower, that doesn't replace the desire or plan to get fiber there, or does it?
It doesn't. These communities are likely communities that were even smaller than the ones that we have chosen to bring fiber to. So the criteria for fiber was, a size, the nature of the businesses there, the uptake of the existing services, those kinds of things. I suspect that the communities that these are in are probably even further down in terms of population.
So what are the characteristics required to be prioritized for fiber right now?
Just as I mentioned.
Yeah.
So we would look at size, traffic. We look at the history in terms of whether they're hitting capacity, what the residents are subscribing for. So as I mentioned today, we offer 50/10 in many of these communities. Depending on the demographics in the community is subscribing for 50/10, the maximum they can get, which suggests to us that they're pushing up against the maximum that they can get, or small percentages are, in which case, our view is if it's an older town, they may not be that interested in whether they could get a gigabit versus the 10 megabits that they're getting today, if they're not even interested in the 50. So, and we also take a look at whether or not there are businesses in the community, kind of the needs of the community to the extent that we can. If there are competitors that are already offering those types of services in the community. So there's a number of those types of factors that we try to look at.
No, I appreciate that. So the size and then the volume of data that's required is sort of that, creates that threshold. Can you, I won't understand how much, like if you quantify how much data, could you point almost to, what a community looks like or what that average population might be of a community that would be a priority then or be eligible for the fiber?
I'd say the most recent communities that we have approved for the last tranche would include communities such as Birch Hills. So that's a community of about 1,000 people. It would include Shaunavon, those types of communities. By and large, we are at the point where we're talking about communities right around 1,000-ish for population, and looking downwards. So pretty much most of the communities, unless there's some exception, that have larger populations will already be in our plan, and we are trying to get well below that.
So is there a goal then? Right now you're making sure you're kind of connecting these communities of 1,000. I don't know how many outstanding communities there'd be in that category. And then what's next? Like what's the next threshold? Is it then connecting communities that are 750 or 500 or?
Yeah, I would say it's not. There isn't a goal based on population. It will be. What would it take to, say, get the next 25 communities going? And who are they? What does the business case look like for those? We would then work with the shareholder to make sure that our board and our shareholder understands the financial implications of taking those on, because typically these are driven more by social policy than they are a strong bottom line. In fact, many of them are not profit, are not a positive business case.
This work is so important. It is one of the reasons, recognizing that when you're connecting a community of 1,000, that there's not the return by way of the revenues that are coming back to the people of all of the Crown. I think it's why it's one of those things that the dividend, and I'll leave this more to the minister, that the dividend is something that should be addressed right now, because if in fact we value this connectivity all across Saskatchewan in our rural communities and our northern communities, we're a vast province. It, I think, is only appropriate that it's carried forward and capitalized as a provincial project. But further than that, the folks like the federal government, could play an important role here. And I hear of some of the dollars. I think I've seen $7 billion dedicated towards rural connectivity, and I don't know how those dollars are accessed. I would hope and assume that SaskTel is fully able to access all of those dollars. And I guess I would just seek a bit of an update as to what federal dollars are being accessed. Are we being treated fairly on that front? And how are we doing in proportion to other provinces? I mean, SaskTel as a Crown is actually a pretty invaluable tool for the federal government to decide to, invest because we can really deliver that value for people.
Well, thank you for the question. There are a couple federal funds that are available right now to fund development projects. Starting with the Canadian Broadband Fund, it's a CRTC broadband fund. That fund is in itself funded by the large telecommunications providers. So we put money into it, as does Bell, TELUS, Rogers, and it constitutes a fund of about $750 million. The CRTC then manages the distribution of that fund for projects, worthy projects that we all then in turn subscribe for. We have 10 applications before the CRTC for projects under that fund, and we have not yet received any word. Now, I understand that they have thousands of applications, and it may well be simply a matter of getting through those applications, but funding has gone out from that fund to other provinces. I can only tell you that thus far our 10 applications have not received any funding. Then there is a universal broadband fund, kind of a duplicate fund. This one, though, is funded by the federal government. It was initially funded to the tune of $1.75 billion. They have since committed to adding additional money, I believe over time, so exactly where that fund's at, I'm not sure. Large portions of that fund were kind of predetermined to go to, say, Telesat. I think 600 million of that fund was committed to go to Telesat. Another large chunk, maybe 150 to 200 million, was committed to go to shovel-ready projects. And then there was the balance of the fund, which is available for normal projects. And again, we have 11 projects there. So we've submitted the same 10 plus an additional, actually 9 of the original 10 and two additional projects. And again, we're awaiting word as to whether or not any of those will be approved.
Right now, these things are, I think, held up because of the federal election. But so far, it's been somewhat of a disappointment that they've either been turned down or there's been no response because they're professionals at it. They're well-prepared applications, and we've seen similar applications in other jurisdictions that have been accepted. So hopefully, as they get down to work through it, that some of the applications are there. We know that other carriers, I think one other carrier has had an application accepted for some portions of northern Saskatchewan, so we're glad to see this. SaskTel purchases spectrum for the cellular network from CRTC, and every year makes a large investment through the spectrum auction, and it's only appropriate that some of that money should find its way back into the province. So are going to continue to keep pressure on the federal government and try and connect with the appropriate minister, whoever it turns out to be after the election, and see who it is. Maybe it'll be Prime Minister Singh, and we'll ask for a meeting.
I won't ask the minister if he has a lawn sign for him or not, but I will just identify that those are really important dollars for us to be accessing, and just thank you so much to SaskTel for repping Sask's interests in rightfully gaining our share of those federal dollars. And certainly, I think we could speak with a united voice out of this assembly that those dollars are deserved by Saskatchewan people, and that frankly, if you look at what the value of SaskTel and how those dollars can be leveraged and what they can do to connect, how meaningful they can be from a rural ECDEV perspective, from a safety perspective, from connecting, enabling technologies through agriculture and everything else. These are important dollars, and that's made real possible because of that Crown Corporation SaskTel. So this is an important file, and I would actually urge the minister to remain ready to be deployed in a constructive and effective way as the Crown may identify, and he needs to know that he has a willing partner in the opposition to make sure that we're making that case to Ottawa. I was pleased to see those dollars dedicated towards these ends, but we need to make sure that they're advancing the interests of Saskatchewan at this point in time. So thank you for that.
Couldn't agree with the member more on the importance of those dollars and anything that any of us can do to try and push the federal government to do this. I don't know what the outcome of the federal government is, and pardon my humor on that, but I think it's a disappointment that it has not yet happened. It has happened in other jurisdictions, other provinces, and we intend to call the federal government out on it as soon as the election is over, urge them to get back to work, process the applications, and look favorably on what is taking place in this province. So we do have, as the member office points, remote areas that are very much in need of it. I think I've got one of your relatives that lives along the Hanson Lake Road that I of course, recognize the last name on it, and that's one of the areas that we want to get to. I suspect that may be one of your questions, not wanting to anticipate, but we know that there are areas that need to be covered, and we look to the federal government to pay their share and, in fact, pay back some of the money that they've received through the spectrum auctions.
Could the minister describe, and I'll just say it's appreciated, certainly the folks on the Hanson Lake Road and communities like White Swan Lake will appreciate that they're being identified, but ultimately what they want to know is what's the plan for connectivity, and but I appreciate that. Could the minister just describe what undertakings he's taken on with respect to the federal government in these dollars?
We've written letters in support of the applications that are being made by SaskTel. We'll continue to do that, for the benefit of your relatives. We know, and in absolute fairness, setting aside politics, that is an area of the province we would very much like to be able to provide coverage to. And in the event that we don't get funding from the federal government, it would be at or near the top of the list for SaskTel. So,
the folks certainly, mentioning one community, there's many like it, and I think that's the big thing is the communication and the plan towards when folks can be connected is valued. Just moving up not going up the Hanson Lake Road, now going straight up the middle to the tri-communities of La Ronge, Lac La Ronge, Indian Band, and Air Ronge. I wouldn't be giving justice to this file or to my good friend, the member for Cumberland, if I didn't bring forward, as he's asked, for me to follow up on what he describes as inadequate connectivity for those communities. One of the cases he really makes is that you're not dealing with the population of just one community. You're dealing with 3 different communities that need to be looked as a region. And as well, if you look at Air Ronge, La Ronge, Lac La Ronge, Indian Band, and the neighboring communities there, it's a real hub of service and support and economic opportunities for the north. So maybe an update on that front. I know my good friend, who I don't think you'll find a harder working MLA than the member for Cumberland. He's a terrible fisher. Not good at fishing at all, but he's an incredible MLA, and I know he's pushing hard to, address what he says is inadequate service.
Thank you for raising it on his behalf. It's and the comments you make about the member, in spite of my banter with him in the House, he's a good person and means well. So,
First, I apologize for just stepping away there for a second, but I just want to talk to our legal counsel who really is in charge of these files, just to make sure we weren't somehow jeopardizing the applications in front of the federal government by naming the locations. And there is some sensitivity around that. So if I could answer your next question without talking about whether they are or aren't the subject of an application for funding, I can tell you that they do suffer from the same problem that many of the communities along that area do, and that is a lack of backbone, a lack of transport capacity to both get the signal to them and to bring it back down. And that they are all on our roadmap of areas that we recognize that we need to address with kind of a similar solution. It all starts with getting the appropriate backbone in place, and then that allows us to branch off and put up the cell towers and get in the data services. So without the backbone, you really can't provide adequate cell service except through a microwave shot, which has lots of limitations. And so I don't know if it answers the question to tell you, we recognize La Ronge, Air La Ronge, all of the locations that you mentioned as having inadequate service, and they are. We do have a plan for them if we can move some of the pieces on the board.
That's appreciated. We talked a bit about the prioritization around fiber deployment, and I understand there's over 400 communities that aren't connected to fiber And what I'm hearing is that there's some different approaches in some of these situations based on size and economics, but a recognition that everyone deserves connectivity. With respect to the smaller tower program, the 100-foot program, now I understand that that's coming to an end here right now. It seems like it's been a successful program. Is there a plan being put in place to advance another tranche of that program? And if you could describe just a little bit, we've talked about who sort of, is the currently eligible based on prioritization on the fiber side around population and whatnot. Could you describe a little bit more what sort of communities, population size are we talking about for this other program? And if you're also able to give a few examples of those, it always helps illuminate things when, when you identify that, it's Shaunavon or, as you did in the other response.
we'd received comments from the legal counsel on not commenting too much about which communities may be under the applications for the federal grant. So we'll be cautious on those remarks. If there's one thing that I agree with everybody in this room is you can't have enough lawyers and you can't take enough advice from lawyers. You may or may not know another lawyer right there. So
Don't hold that against me.
I thought your father-in-law was a lawyer. So, in any event, the member had asked about the usage of the small towers in small communities. It's a business decision and a practical decision what the best type of tower for a given area is, and that'll depend on terrain, the size of the community, how close around the base of the tower the community might be, or how much they'd be spread out. To do a tower, either a small one or a large one, requires sufficient land for the footprint of the tower and the structure on the base, as well as a power line going to it. So there has to be electrification, plus the ability to get the fiber to the tower. So the small towers work quite well to supplement areas in and around cities and in some smaller centers, but I'll certainly let Mr. Burnett give a greater detail on it. As we would travel along new areas of Saskatchewan where we have not yet been, likely the first path would be try and cover as much distance as you can, because you're trying to cover a highway. So the larger towers, the $1 million plus towers, would be the ones that would use. Would give the best coverage to try and move across an area. Now, what they've done is they've used phases for a number of the communities that are there, and they're working on phase 4, which will add about another 24 or 25 communities. The province has directed they spend an additional $50 million, which was not initially budgeted, but that was the direction to come up with them, and may look at more as they go forward. But that's certainly it's there. So I'm going to let Mr. Burnett answer which are in phase 2 and which are in phase 3. Phase 3 is the current one that is being done for 21, 22. Some of those communities will be already done. Some of them will be done sometime in the future. But to answer more specifically the question about L'Orange, it's on the list and has been announced. I don't think it's under construction yet, but it's there. And I asked specifically whether that would cover all 3 of the communities that are there, and they're going to look at it and see that it does. I think you've been up there and know the Lac L'Orange Indian Band is immediately adjacent to the town of L'Orange, and Air-Ronge is sort of across and just down. So anyway, I'll let Mr. Burnett indicate which of the communities.
Okay, great. Thank you, Minister. Yeah, so in the small towers, so there isn't a program as such. The Minister's given you the logic for that, but on an ongoing, they really will now fall into our normal work projects. So to the extent that we identify a location, that will simply occur outside of a project. Not that we won't use that technology because it's been successful, but you shouldn't anticipate that there's going to be a large program around it that we're working on. As the Minister said, that the fiber installs, phase 1 has been completely announced. Phase 2, I can list the communities for you if you'd like, and these are the communities that will be done in all likelihood this year, 21-22. So that includes Kindersley, Lloydminster, Meadow Lake, and Rosetown. So those 4 will be done this year. And then phase 3 is a much larger phase, and it will include, I think, some 23 communities. These should be done by the end of 2023 and would include the communities of Kenora, Carlisle, I thought there'd be a smile over there, Esterhazy, Fort Capel, Hudson Bay, Indian Head, Kamsack, L'Orange, Lumsden, Maple Creek, Moosomin, Shaunavon, Watrous, Wynyard, and that looks like that covers it. So those are the locations that will be done by 2023. And then there are another 24 locations, which is this last tranche that has been announced, but the locations themselves have not been made public yet.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I saw a couple smiling faces around with my colleagues here. Some of those communities were identified. With respect to connectivity on First Nations, it seems to me, I believe it was a federal scan that at least the characterization, I have the report, I can pull it out, but it showed that in that scan that connectivity on First Nations is very low in Saskatchewan relative to other provinces. Certainly First Nations communities, deserve and need access to the internet, and cellular coverage as well. And it's important, again, for all these reasons. It's sort of an essential service. It's important for quality of life and safety and security, and it's important for economic opportunities. So I guess I'd appreciate a bit of an update as to why it appears that we're so far behind other jurisdictions, other provinces with respect to connecting First Nations, and what efforts are being undertaken to address that.
First of all, I am not aware that we are behind other provinces. In fact, I think Saskatchewan is second, maybe third to two maritime provinces in terms of driving fiber or broadband into rural locations, including First Nations, and that we lead the rest of the country in that regard. But I can tell you that First Nations are significantly underserved, even in our province. And the difficulty is that they tend to be, the residences tend to be very far apart, making it very difficult to serve with a technology that that we can do kind of cost efficiently. They are on our radar, and we have included them in many of the programs that we have here. Some of them are relatively large, and so it is an area of focus for us, and it's absolutely a deficiency, I think, across Canada.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the response as well, and I only want to characterize the accurate situation, and so and I understand sometimes how you measure these things can cause maybe some challenge in what you're comparing, and certainly First Nations in Saskatchewan are distributed across the province, and maybe in other jurisdictions there's larger, greater, populations that are being served. But I would just maybe leave by way of record as something to be reviewed then, because when I read this report, it was a cause for concern as I looked at the graph portraying Saskatchewan. But it's the Communications Monitoring Report by the Government of Canada, and it was put out fairly recently through, I guess it's CRTC. And it's the LTE and broadband availability. And within that, the graph, table 4.3, which it says is measuring this 5010 access, the megabytes per second, really doesn't have Saskatchewan stacking up well in the way it's characterized relative to other provinces. And so I'll leave it with you. It might be that the 5010 measurement, but it has Saskatchewan at 1.7% for First Nations reserves, and even next door in Alberta, it has them at 19.6 in that same, or places like British Columbia at 68.3. So I'm not sure. I present this if you do have a response that helps us understand this disparity, that's good. I've heard that it's a priority for SaskTel itself, and I think that's really important. But I reference it for your folks as well, and maybe the minister or someone has some context on this report.
It's a report that I'm thinking of. I think you'll find that Saskatchewan's data is a year older than the rest of the survey group. And over the course of the last year, SaskTel has pushed 5010 out to approximately, I think it's 65% of the community. So that has pushed us up on that measurement, I think, as I mentioned, to third, second only to the two maritime provinces. So it was almost comparing apples with oranges, in that it was, say, comparing 2019 data from Saskatchewan with 2020 data from the rest of the sample group.
No, appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering whether we might ask the member if he might provide us with a copy of the report, or at least the cover, so we know for sure what it is, so we're able to follow up. But thank you for raising it.
The flagged pages there too. Those are the pages. That's the graph that I referenced. Okay. Being sent your way. So you've described the different technologies and programs for the various regions and characteristics of Saskatchewan. There's other technologies that we hear about. We hear about Starlink as an example of, and I guess my question would be, how does something like Starlink get assessed from a perspective as a province, or from SaskTel's perspective? And is it a complementary, program that can help assist certain situations that, receive connectivity that SaskTel can't provide? Is it a threat from a commercial or economic perspective? Has the minister met with Musk on these matters and, discussed, if there's a fit, or in fact, if it's not a fit at all? I think there's some subscription in the program within the province as we speak.
Mr. Chair, the member has raised a lot of potential comments about Starlink, and the simple answer is yes to all. In some parts of the province, Starlink is a good fit, a good add-on, and then there's areas of the province where it would not be possible or practical to get fiber to, or much of a good coverage for, and in those situations, Starlink is a good thing, and SaskTel is monitoring that closely, and has a number of employees that they've asked to subscribe to Starlink, so that they're aware of how effective or what the problems are or are not with Starlink. And then there are areas where there's denser population, where there's other coverage, and in those cases, Starlink would be a direct competitor. I haven't watched it myself, but I'm told it opens in a box, much like an Apple product. I don't know if you've seen it, and is easy to install. You apparently use your phone to connect and whatever, and it finds the satellites, or finds where the satellites are traveling across. So in the situations where SaskTel already has coverage, it's certainly a competitive option that's there. But for other areas of the province, and I made reference to the $7.2 billion, there's certainly some of those situations where we would probably want to regard that as being a companion service that will enable our Saskatchewan citizens to be able to find acceptable coverage. So I'll let Mr. Burnett add whatever he wishes.
No, I think the minister's described it very well. It's in a beta test mode today, so it's a little difficult to assess what it will really function like when it's loaded right up. When we talk to our engineers, they think that today's speeds, which I think can be easily 120 megabits per second, which is a pretty good speed, may have to come down, just because ultimately this signal does have to be beamed up and down to an earth station, which has some bottlenecks. and that apparently can't be overcome. So it is a perfect solution. At 7.2 billion for us to get fiber to the farms, it is just not viable. At least I don't see a road to that. But if Starlink is able to provide 100 megabit service to the individual farm, that would certainly alleviate lots of problems. It is a competitor for us even in that instance, but it's also, I think really a dovetailed solution that dovetails well with what we need to do to improve service in deep rural areas. Where it starts to become more of a competitor might be as you get closer to some of the more inhabited areas, larger groups of people, larger gatherings of farms, or small communities that are currently being served by that fusion technology that I mentioned earlier that's at 10 megabits per second. Well, if this service is still providing service at 100 megabits per second, it will be very competitive to that service. I did mention that will be upgraded as we move towards 5G, but in the meantime, that's probably where the most competition truly starts to hit. I think when you get to the communities, very much less so of a competitor. There, fiber, copper, and 5G will likely outperform the LEO satellites. So that's kind of the spectrum of how we see it, and there's still a lot unknown in terms of how it'll function when it's finally in commercial mode.
Well, thanks for that information. Just seeking a bit of an update as to, sometimes I hear within the agricultural community, in the rural community, that one of the challenges is that we have such sophisticated technology that's now incorporated into the tractors and the combines and all the implements, and it all lends itself to more sustainable agriculture as well, and precision agriculture. But one of the challenges, of course, is connectivity, and so germane to this conversation. But I hear from some, and I'm just wondering what assessment there is on this front, that the RTK technology is a technology that works for all the technology that's being deployed in agriculture, and that's a positioning system that apparently is quite an affordable system to establish, and a rather simple technology, this real-time kinematic RTK that allows folks to utilize these big investments, but to deploy the technology that they can. Right now, a lot of folks have technology on their tractor, their combine, or their sprayer that they can't currently utilize due to connectivity. Folks I chat with on this front, some of them suggest that one way that the Crown could really be helpful on this front is enabling some of the technology or the infrastructure, maybe towers, to be able to work with a group of producers in a region who then kind of pool together and collectively, bear the cost, but are given some significant value by being able to utilize that infrastructure that's there. I'm just interested on these fronts. Is this something that's being explored, by SaskTel, and do you have any analysis on these fronts?
Meetings have taken place with SARM and with some individual groups and with APAS, and the point you make about individual producers needing to have bandwidth or access to the technology in a field or in a remote area is incredibly important to that individual. They've made an investment, sometimes of millions of dollars, and they need to have access to bandwidth for operation of that equipment. I mentioned at the outset, that to do all of the residences in the province would be some $7.2 billion. If they were going to try and do every field in the province, you can imagine how much exponentially more it is. So I think the point you raised is something that SaskTel has worked with and is going to continue to work with, is the different producer groups, and if you have somebody that you want to refer to us by way of case, we'll be glad to meet with them. SaskTel has gone into smaller communities where they've said, okay, it does not warrant us to do fiber or to do a fusion, but if the community wants to bear a cost of it, we'll pay this and we'll provide financing for it. So I think the same would hold true for a consumer group or a group of farmers, or even one or two small farmers that could benefit from having either a tower or some kind of a data link, some kind of a connection. So I appreciate the point, and I know SaskTel has had discussions and will continue to have more.
I appreciate that. And just to be clear, my understanding of this RTK is it's a more simple kind of positioning device, sort of just a basic transmitter. So it's certainly connectivity is important from a data perspective, but this is separate and apart from that. And these folks are saying that, in fact, you could use a cell phone tower and have these simple transmitters that would then be able to be deployed actually very efficiently by the producers within the region. One of the challenges they suggest right now is that folks like a big farm, is able to do this on their own. They'll put up a tower and they'll put up the device, the transmitters, and they can run this system, but it's hard if you're, if you look at any RM map, or many farms, there's many different sizes, and you might have land here and some up a ways over, and so they would suggest that there's an opportunity to maybe use some of the infrastructure that's already there. They would suggest that there's a way to maybe go about it that doesn't really come at a cost to SaskTel, and that there's a very efficient tool that could support the technologies that are being deployed in agriculture. So I appreciate the interest and would urge that follow-up. With respect to of course, over the last number of years, many security concerns have been identified with respect to Huawei, and there's been a lot of analysis, and there's been recommendations. We know that SaskTel went down the road of entering into some contractual relationships with Huawei for certain technology. What I'm interested in, I guess, as a first question is, what's been the total expenditure with Huawei to date, and what expenditure exists in the 2 annual reports that are under consideration here today, either directly to Huawei or indirectly through a third party?
I'll say this, it's somewhat deceptive because the existing Huawei equipment is 4G equipment. The decision was made that Huawei equipment should not be in 5G towers or in the core network, has not been, nor will it be. So the existing 4G equipment exists in Saskatoon, Regina, and will be redeployed to other areas of the province that are not suitable to have 5G coverage. You may or may not be aware 5G signals do not travel very far. They're largely intended for densely populated areas. So I think I'll be able to give you the amount of expenditure on Huawei. The other one will be the expenditure on Samsung, because the Samsung equipment is significantly more expensive than the Huawei equipment, and we are aware of the security risks that there are with Huawei. I think I'd point out, that over a past number of years, we used to have a superb trading relationship with China. Large amounts of our agricultural products, canola and livestock, went to China every year. Literally billions of dollars went every year, and we were purchasing Huawei equipment from them, which was a high-quality product, worked well, and they were a good partner in providing support. Given what's taken place with Meng Wanzhou and with the 2 Michaels, it's a situation that is untenable for us to maintain that relationship, we made the rather difficult decision that we were not going to go further with Huawei, and made that decision before we started to integrate whatever was going to take place with 5G. So I'll let Mr. or Charlene, whoever's going to answer the question as to what money has been spent on Huawei, and then you may, if you've got some projections available for Samsung?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Minister. Let me start out by saying we estimate that we've probably, over a long period of time, we've had a fairly lengthy relationship with Huawei, I think since about 2010, that we probably today have about $200 to $220 million worth of Huawei equipment on our radio access network. That's not to suggest that we are going to salvage $220 million worth. As the minister indicated, two things are going to happen here. It's going to take us probably 5+ years to transition to a 5G network and to transition to Samsung equipment. And in the meantime, Huawei equipment will stay on these towers, and it will become obsolete, as it would in the normal course of things. So much of that equipment will have spent its full life, its full financial life, and should not be considered as part of this $220 million. Also, some of that equipment, as we put up Samsung equipment, will then be moved, as the minister mentioned, to other locations that could benefit from newer, higher capacity type of equipment. So as we build out Regina and Saskatoon, which will be the first areas to receive 5G, that equipment tends to be the newest and strongest equipment. We'll move that deeper and deeper into rural locations and redeploy it, and it will continue then to serve out its useful life. And so we anticipate that one way or another, we probably would incur almost the full expense of putting up these 5G radios, simply because equipment does tend to need to be replaced about every 7 years. So it's not a real black and white answer where I could tell you $220 million worth of Huawei equipment is going to be salvaged and we're going to have to replace it. The minister did mention that the Samsung equipment is more expensive than the Huawei equipment to put up. And that's very true. The Samsung equipment is also much more powerful. So where we needed 2 Huawei radios, we will need 1 Samsung radio. And so when you factor in that, it really almost is a wash. In many instances, 2 of the old Huawei radios is more expensive than the 1 Samsung radio to replace it. And in other instances, it's just slightly the other way around. So the actual equipment that's going to go back up, although more expensive, probably requires less and is almost probably a wash. The biggest cost for us to do this change is actually the labor of climbing the pole and taking the equipment down and putting it. That in itself is about a $70,000 touch per tower. And again, we probably wouldn't incur the full $70,000 if you were just going up to supplement a Huawei radio. So a portion, probably the majority of that $70,000 is as a result of our decision to go to Samsung versus sticking with Huawei. So it's kind of it's a very convoluted thing to try and work your way through to say, well, how much is it going to cost us to actually go to Samsung? Much of that equipment will be redeployed and used right to the full end of its life. There will be some additional cost over the next 5 years of having to actually take down some Huawei equipment and put up some Sam. That's probably the primary cost, a primary additional cost.
Appreciate the update and the minister's response. And I know the minister will know full well that we've pushed the concerns around security with respect to Huawei for some time, making sure they were paramount in the decisions being made within our province and protecting our network. I know I had it described to me by one security expert that you're not paying more for these other competitors' products. You're actually paying for the price of a secure network. You're paying for integrity and confidence that you can count on. With respect to the security itself, because I hear that there's going to be continued utilization of some of the infrastructure some of the technology that's been acquired, and I don't understand the implications on the network. Something that we've called for over a number of years, and I'm sure there's been due diligence done by SaskTel, but what do you have by way of analysis and assessment of the security risks of the current technology that's integrated within the SaskTel network?
Generally known through the industry as the world sort of was making the difficult decision of what to do with 5G. The U.S. carriers that had used Huawei and the European carriers all took the same position. There was not a risk with 4G because of how the data was handled. 5G is where the potential risk was. So far as we know, there's not been a breach anywhere, but who knows what's happened that we don't know about. But the engineering staff within SaskTel have always taken the position that there is not a security risk to use 4G equipment, and 4G equipment from Huawei is used globally. So the issue is that it's not being accepted to use for 5G equipment, and I think there may be some places in the UK that decided to use it in any event, but we made the decision here that it was not appropriate to take the chance. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'll now ask a member to move that we conclude consideration of the 2019, 2020, 2021 SaskTel annual reports, the Saskatchewan Telecommunications financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, the Saskatchewan Telecommunications International Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Direct West Corporation financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Secure Tech Monitoring Solutions Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, and Saskatchewan Telecommunications Pension Plan Annual Report financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. Do I have a mover? Mr. Terry Jensen has moved that we conclude the consideration. Is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. That concludes our business with SaskTel. Mr. Morgan, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you and the committee members. In spite of some of the strong words that take place, it is a good learning experience for members of the public that watch. So I want to thank the committee for the information that was there. I would like to as well thank the Ledge Assembly Services, Hansard Building Security, and the building staff for the work that they do to make these meetings take place. And then today I would specifically like to thank the SaskTel officials that are here today and the SaskTel workers that work all year round to make sure that we've got reliable service. And in particular, I would like to mention the great workers of Unifor who have gone out sometimes in adverse conditions to make sure that signals continue to operate and to go out and trade batteries during and cell phones during power outages, etc. So we know that that is not always the easiest or most pleasant task, and we thank them for that.
Mr. Witherspoon, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, just thanks so much. Thanks to the Minister for most of the exchange, his pleasant disposition for 90% of the exchange, and his time here today. Thank you so much to Mr. Burnett and all the leadership of SaskTel, all the workers across the province that are a part of such an incredible company that means so much to the people of the province. So thanks for the time here today.
Thank you. We will now take a short recess and bring the officials in from CIC. Welcome to the officials from CIC. We're going to start with the consideration of the Provincial Auditor's 2018 Report, Volume 2, Chapter 34, GradWorks, Inc., Achieving the Intern Development Programs Goals. Ms. Clement, please make your presentation to this chapter.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Chair, committee members, Minister, and government officials. Before I present the chapter on the agenda, I would like to thank the President and CEO of CIC and his staff for their cooperation extended to us during our audit work. So Chapter 34 in our 2018 report, Volume 2, outlines 4 recommendations we initially made in our 2015 audit of GradWorks Incorporated's processes to achieve intern development program goals. GradWorks was a nonprofit organization established by CIC and was responsible for the GradWorks Intern Development Program. The Intern Development Program provided recent post-secondary graduates with employment experience through paid internships with CIC, CIC Crown Corporations, and their subsidiaries. Due to CIC discontinuing the intern program in 2017, and formally dissolving GradWorks on March 31st, 2018, we determined the 4 recommendations we originally made in the 2015 audit are no longer relevant. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Minister Morgan, please make your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to be here before the Standing Committee on Crown and Central Agencies to speak to a number of Crown Investments Corporation's report. With me this afternoon to assist in answering your questions are senior officials from Crown Investments Corporation. Mr. Kent Campbell, President and CEO, Ms. Cindy Ogilvie, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Brian Garrick, Vice President Corporate Services, and Mr. Travis Massier, Corporate Controller, as well as my Chief of Staff, Jared Dunlop. On the agenda for consideration today is the Provincial Auditor's Report 2018 Report, Volume 2, Chapter 34, the 2019-20 and 2021 Crown Investments Corporation Annual Reports. This includes the consolidated financial statements for the Crown sector and the separate statements for CIC. The CIC Asset Management Inc. financial statements for the years ended March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. The First Nations and Métis Fund Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. The Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund Inc. financial statement for the years ended March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021. The Capital Pension Plan annual reports for the years ended March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, as well as the 2019-20 Pay Disclosure Report. Mr. Chair, CIC oversees the Crown sector, ensuring strong governance, performance, and accountability. It provides advice, direction, and oversight to the sector through the Crown sector strategic priorities, which are developed to align with the government's priorities. Saskatchewan's Crown corporations produce strong results year after year with excellent customer service, affordable and safe utilities, cost-effective insurance programs, fostering innovative tech startups, and offering first-class entertainment opportunities. Financial results for 2019-20 and 2020-21 continued to be strong. Results for 2019-20 were net earnings of $435.4 million, a contribution of $350 million to the GRF, capital spending of $1.3 billion, total Crown assets of $20.6 billion, and a debt level of $10.3 billion at year-end. A consolidated debt ratio of 61.1% and a consolidated return on equity of 7.6%. Results for 2020-21 were net earnings of $585.4 million, $150 million paid to the General Revenue Fund, bringing the total paid to the GRF over the past 5 years to over $1.1 billion. Capital spending of $1.2 billion. Crown assets total $21 billion, with $10.3 billion in debt at year-end. A consolidated debt ratio of 59.5% and a consolidated return on equity of 9.7%. These results were accomplished in years that had unprecedented challenge with the COVID pandemic and volatile markets. Not only has the Crown sector successfully managed through these challenges, but it continues to be part of the solution for Saskatchewan and its people. The Crown sector maintained operations and continued to provide critical services. The services provided by the Crowns are an integral part of day-to-day life here in this province, and they also play a big part in the solution to stimulate the economy. I indicated in July at the news conference for the tabling of the 2020-21 annual reports that equally as impressive as the financial results for sector are the social outcomes the Crowns achieved during the pandemic, which total $639 million in support for residents and businesses. These include $51,000 for SOCO rent deferrals, $45,000 for waiving charges for local recreational facilities by SaskWater, $158,000 in Crown sector donations supporting Saskatchewan food banks and crisis agencies, $8.7 million in waived data overage fees by SaskTel to support remote work and learning, $8.4 million to provide temporary relief and waive charges for oilfield customers by SaskPower, $752,065 in SGI and SaskWater Fund waived transaction fees, $74 million in deferred utility payments for the Crown Utility Interest Waiver Program, $262 million for the Economic Recovery Rebate, a 10%, which is a 10% rebate on Sask power bills, $285 million in Sask Auto Fund rebates to vehicle owners. The Crown sector will spend $1.6 billion in 2020-21 to help stimulate the economy as part of the Building a Strong Saskatchewan plan, and over the next 5 years, an average of $1.5 billion per year is planned. This equates to a $7.5 billion injection in the provincial economy that will build capacity and create jobs. With that, Mr. Chair, I thank you, and we are prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you, Minister. Do any members have any questions on the audit report? Mr. Witherspoon?
Just first off, I'd like to just welcome everybody that's here, all the officials that are here, President Campbell, CEO Campbell, the Minister, of course, and our Auditor, Auditor Clement, for her presentation. And with respect to the GradWorks chapter, I understand that it's no longer relevant, so I don't have questions for the auditor with respect to that chapter. I guess the only point I'd put to the minister is GradWorks was a really good program, and it provided young people with a couple really important things. It provided them with an opportunity to have a job and to build skills and experience in the public sector and the Crown sector in the province. Certainly, if we look at youth unemployment in Saskatchewan, it's a challenge for many, as is gaining some of that invaluable experience in these Crown corporations. The program, of course, was wound down by your government a number of years ago. But I guess I would urge the minister, is there some consideration to building an internship program like GradWorks, call it something else if he likes, to ensure those opportunities for young people and those jobs across Saskatchewan?
Thank you to the member for the comment. The GradWorks program was put in place to try and discourage people from leaving the province, to try and indicate to young people that there were good job opportunities with our Crowns here. The current program right now is that we have the graduate retention program and a number of other facilities that are through advanced education. The GradWorks program costs about $3 million a year, but the Crowns today aren't facing the same issues. Young people are staying in the province and they work at companies like Vendasta, Viterra, Nutrien, as well as our Crowns. To the member's point specifically, our Crowns still hire summer students. This year we're expecting the Crowns to hire over 220 summer students. We want to build and continue to build an economic climate that people are inclined to and want to stay in the province. The specific need that was addressed by GradWorks is not one that's there now, but I think the member makes a good point that any program that promotes young people staying, gives them some educational opportunities, is worth considering. So we'll pass it to CIC and ask them to see where it fits and what things might do with regard to other programs. So, but thank you for raising it.
Thank you. With that, we'll move into the 2018 report. Volume 2, Chapter 34 has no new recommendations for the committee to consider. I'll ask a member to move that we conclude the consideration of this chapter. Mr. Derek Myers has moved that we conclude the consideration of the 2018 report, Volume 2, Chapter 34. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business with our acting provincial auditor and her team in office today.
And to thank the provincial auditor for the work that's done by their office. This is the last time we'll see them during this round of meetings, and they've been in and out for the last couple of days. and want to thank them for all of the work that they do by providing guidance and direction, and in the collaborative manner in which it's provided. We're well served by their office, and want to let them know that their work is respected, valued, and we thank them for that.
As the chair, I'd also like to thank Ms. Clement and your team for your services that you've provided with us over the last 2 days and over the last while to this committee. You're excused at this point, and thank you so much for your work. The committee will be moving on to consider CIC's annual reports, including the 2019, 2020, 2021, 2021 Crown Investment Corp annual reports, CIC Asset Management Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020, March 31st, 2021, First Nations and Métis Fund Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund Inc. financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, Capital Pension Annual Reports for the year ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, and 2019-2020 Investment Corp and Subsidy Crown Pay Disclosure Reports. With that, do any members have any questions on the CIC reports and financial statements? I recognize Mr. Weatherspoon.
Sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and all the officials, of course. Just looping back to the line of questions that we started with in SaskTel, with just a bit of follow-up to understand the role of CIC in the rebranding exercise that has now been thankfully halted or put on pause, as the Minister's described. I just am interested in the involvement and the role of CIC on this undertaking.
Mr. Campbell answer the question. As I indicated, initially the process started with Sask Government Insurance, SGI, coming and wanting to go through a fairly extensive rebranding, and they'd done a significant amount of work. Then it turned out that both CIC was considering it as well as SGC. So then that led to further discussions at CIC and at Exec Council. We sort of we're asking, as I indicated this morning, where the benefits might be, where the benefits might not be. But with regard to the process, I'll let Mr. Campbell answer whatever questions we have.
Thank you, Minister. Maybe just add to that. So the Minister did mention that there was 3 corporations that were looking at some form of rebrand, and so the question arose as to whether we should look at a more broad commonality amongst the Crowns in terms of branding. And so CIC is the holding company. We did do some initial work with the Crowns in terms of looking at what that might look like. So a bit of a coordinating role in that process.
For information, how much either internal resources, how would you characterize the value of the internal resources that were dedicated to this project, and were there any other external resources or costs?
So we, the cost of internal time around rebranding would have been existing, marketing people looking at this. It's hard to quantify because it would be their existing jobs, and I think looking at branding is part of their job. And so whether it's looking at what a more common brand might look like, or something unique to individual Crown, we consider that to be part of their work. And so there was not engagement of third parties in that sense. In the case of Crown Investments Corporation, we had sort of started a look at what a new logo might look like prior to that, and we did have a design developed at a cost of $1,500, but that was certainly the incremental cost that I'm aware of.
Well, Well, thank you for the update. I know we've followed up with various crowns, and we're well on the record with concern to the project and in undermining potentially the strong relationship that each of the brands of the respective crowns have with their customers, and recognizing the exceptional marketing teams that they have, and then just recognizing from a cost perspective how exorbitant this project would have been. You know, and certainly at this time, or even at any time, that's a very serious undertaking. So we're glad to hear it's not going forward. The only part that we maybe don't like as much is that we hear that the word pause. I really think things like marketing and branding need to be led by the individual crowns. But I appreciate very much the response of the President and CEO. Moving along a little bit to some of the other considerations that we have before us here today. I'm interested in knowing with respect to anything that's been described as equity repayment from Crown Investments Corporation of Saskatchewan for the respective annual reports. If that can be characterized and described to us, that's appreciated.
Maybe I'll have Cindy Ogilvie, our CFO, answer that question.
Thank you. Cindy Ogilvie. I think we usually have to provide our names. Cindy Ogilvie, Vice President and CFO at CIC. So sorry, Mr. Witherspoon, can you provide just exactly what you're wanting? Is it the amounts, why they're provided? If you can just detail your question a bit more.
Yeah, well, appreciated. So just if you can describe or list the equity repayment from Crown Investment Corporations, from CIC, if in these two annual reports, and then describe why the purpose of why those are being made.
Give you the purpose, and then I'll have Travis provide me with the exact numbers. Purpose of equity repayments, they're typically from time to time. They're not an annual event that would occur. We look for dividends usually on an annual basis based on the Crown's capacity to pay. Equity repayments are unique and infrequent events based on the capacity of the Crowns. Typically, it would be after the sale of an asset, so they've got some cash freed up, or perhaps their capital has decreased, their need for capital has decreased, and they've got some cash availability there, and they're able to provide a repayment of the government's investment in them back to the government. So the Crowns were set up many years ago with equity investments into them, so those are still there today, and they're just repaying those. And Travis can provide the exact amounts.
Travis Master, Corporate Controller of Crown Investments Corporation. CIC paid no equity payments to the GRF in 2020-21. They made a $100 million equity repayment in 2019-20. Thanks.
The two reports that we have before us, there was none in the one fiscal year. In the other one, it was $119 million.
100 million exactly.
100 million. And in which crown does that involve? Can you describe it a bit more?
So for the 100 million in 2019-20, we would have taken some, I believe there was 34 million that came in from Sask Power, and then CIC would have had some cash capacity from other events over the years where we had capital or cash that had built up, and the rest came from CIC.
And this year, is it $200 million this year? Is that correct?
That's what's in the budget, yeah.
And where are those dollars coming from this year?
It'll be coming from a few of the crowns based on what their capacity is, and that will change throughout the year. So we're not quite sure exactly where that will be at this point until we get closer to year end. We have targeted the larger crowns that have capacity based on where we were at when the budgets were developed, which was last fall. So, you know, the year has played out differently than what you would have forecast at the time. So we'll see what their abilities are as the year moves on.
So that's the larger crowns. Could you be a little more specific as far as maybe the targets if possible?
Yep, SaskPower, SaskTel, SaskEnergy, and then CIC as well.
And what sort of allocations were you aiming for?
There was $50 million from SaskEnergy, $25 million from SaskTel, and $75 million from SaskPower, and the balance $50 million from CIC.
And what's the anticipated impact to those respective crowns this year as a result of that allocation?
So that's taking us beyond what the annual report is, getting into the budget for the next year.
That's fair. Yeah. It's a good response. I was just watching for my member across the way there to point out. No, I appreciate the response. The one challenging piece that we sometimes have, Mr. Minister, is that with respect to oversight for our crowns, that we don't have the same, we don't have the same estimates time typically, right, to discuss these things. I can certainly send a note, though, your way to seek clarity on these fronts, because I do understand that it's the two previous annual reports. But unlike other budget lines where you're able to sit down with the minister, you're able to talk about what's anticipated and the impacts. So anyways, I appreciate very much the information that you've provided. Thank you very much. With respect to I understand that CIC's balanced scorecard includes a performance assessment by the CIC board, which is conducted through a survey of all board members. And I understand this survey provides important feedback to CIC on the quality and effectiveness of CIC services to the board. I guess in the spirit of openness and transparency, is the minister able to, is that public? Is the minister able to provide a copy of that, of the previous year's assessment?
I think it's, I would largely be regarded as an internal document, and I think it's asking the individual board members whether they feel the information they're receiving in the board packages are received in a timely manner. Is the information complete and accurate? Are there other things that they wish to see provided? Are they getting their questions asked if they have questions prior to the meetings, what are their decisions? And it's the survey is not a document that's going to take hours to do. I think there was about a 20-minute time allotment, was suggested time allotment for it. I spent maybe a little bit more time on it, because I signed it, so I wanted to be somewhat more responsible. The others may have chosen to put it in anonymously, which was the way they could do it. But I thought I wanted them to know what the concerns that I had. And my preference is I'd rather have things on the iPad than in this, and well, you'd probably be the same. So, and just sort of how the things are there. By and large, the officials at CIC, I think, do a good job of getting the information ready, getting to the board members. But I think the questionnaire was a method of feedback, probably to affirm what they likely already knew, because I think if anybody was dissatisfied, they would have spoken up. So with that, I think it was for the most part a good exercise to go through.
Maybe just to add to that, Minister, the CIC board is in fact it's all elected members. It's like a cabinet subcommittee, and so that's sort of a confidential feedback mechanism we have for them, just to make sure that we're, like the minister said, meeting their expectations.
Any opinion on the minister? We'll move along to the other. Are there any pieces that you're able to glean as sort of anything that brought light to something that was able to that you're able to share, that you're acting upon, or?
I think it was largely operational on what information should be provided, can things be made, and I'll leave it to Mr. Campbell to say whether he thinks that things are totally, that my comments are of any benefit whatsoever, but I'd like to think that, that the comments were read and that we can make the material useful in a different kind of format other than paper. With respect to the accounting profession, they have a great propensity for paper, and I don't. I prefer an iPad that's got tabs on it and work my way through it. So that was the one thing that came out, and we usually have meetings early in the week, and I always like to have the information on the Friday before, so I'm able to spend time on the weekend with it. But I wouldn't say there was anything earth-shattering as far as doing business fundamentally different. If there is some significant issues, I would usually pick up the phone and feel free to bother the CEO at his home on the weekend.
In our most recent survey, there was one comment about it. Share. So that was one verbatim comment I can share. A lot of it did relate to the quality of the analysis, which was appreciated. Overall, quite high ratings, I would say, for the work that we provide. But one of the things we're very interested in learning from them is what's the best way to get you information to make the decisions that you need to make? Because there's a lot of things happening across the Crown sector, right? And these are very busy people who have a number of other committee duties, and many of whom are ministers. And so making sure that we're getting them the right information at the right time in the right form.
Well, thanks for that. I also think we have an excellent chair of this committee here this afternoon. Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
With respect to Crown portfolio, and over the years canvassed in these two annual reports, has there been any initiatives or meetings or considerations that would include sort of equity investments or sell-offs or privatizations of the parts of those Crown holdings?
No. We want to reassure the people of the province that there's no hidden agenda, hidden plan. I don't want to be part of any of those discussions to try and divest or anything else. The goal and what we're pushing the boards of all of the Crowns is look for efficiencies and best ways to provide service to the citizens of the province. So we have a Crown Collaboration Committee that is made up of the CEOs of the different Crowns, and they're working together to try and find better things. And I think I used the example before where Sask Power, Sask Energy use a common line locate service, and then how they would go into a new area to do subdivisions and a variety of things where they share information in a more timely manner. We've asked them to take it a step further and to work with the ministries as well. For example, the Ministry of the Environment as to how they move forward with small modular reactors. So we have a sort of a joint approach from all across government, from Sask Power as well as the Environment and Exec Council, so that everybody knows what we're asking for from the feds, and that we're able to hopefully move that forward as expeditiously as we can over the next number of years. So we've got people that are working in Sask Power that are doing it. We have some people that are working within CIC that are wanting to do it, as well as people. So that's the type of thing that we've encouraged them to work on and work for. We also regard the CIC board as a social utility mandate. Initially, I think there was a sense on the part of all of the Crowns, their role or their responsibility was to produce as much profit as they can. And I'm certainly a profit-oriented person, but some of the things that were going forward were things that we felt there needed to be a slightly different direction on them. And one of the ones were some of the things that we talked about previously today. That we said, okay, you may not be able to pay as much of a dividend. It may affect your debt equity ratio, but we want you to do so many hundred more cell phone towers. We want you to develop strategies for rural internet. We've said to SAS Power, we want you to find ways to improve the infrastructure so we have fewer power outages. We want you to find best practices for maintaining the continuity of supplies, as well as work with the other entities across government to try and develop good strategies for meeting our energy targets, as well as trying to be efficient and be able to continue to provide power and maintain some of the lowest prices in Canada.
Thanks for, so there's no contemplation in these last 2 years, no meetings, no consideration of privatization or an equity stake or a sell-off of Crown, sort of as we've seen with ISC or with the transportation STC, or the meetings, of course, with SGI and SaskTel.
Is not, you know, we have a minority stake in it, so whatever happens at ISC, we have little or no control of ISC. Right. The crowns that we've dealt with over the last 2 days, they're not for sale. You know, we look at strategic partnerships with regard to SOCO and the universities, but the utility ones, those are owned by the people of this province. They're not going anywhere.
What about any other, so setting aside ISC, what about any other crowns or Treasury Board crowns, and any contemplations or actions on this front?
Not that I'm aware of. This is my file. My other file is workers' compensation and labor, and I'm not selling off my relationship with Sask Federation of Labor. It has ups and downs, and right now it's working pretty well. There's some great folks there that I acknowledge and respect and regard as friends.
Shout out to President Job and the good folks over there at the Fed for sure. Good common sense leaders in the province. With respect to CIC's annual report, it references a dividend policy. We've already talked a bit about concerns on dividends from a crown like SaskTel at this time. I think the same can be applied to Sask Power on different fronts. These are crowns that are you know, essential to the people of the province. Different situations for both, you know, and that can be applied across the crown, you know, to each of the specific crowns. But I'd appreciate an explanation of the dividend policy of CIC.
CIC gets a recommendation, or a recommendation comes to the board from CIC based on what they feel the Crown's cash needs might be over the next year, what the cash position is at any particular time, what the debt equity ratio of that particular Crown is, and a dividend is recommended, and then those are reviewed on an ongoing basis because of potential changes during the year. This last year or so with COVID, things have changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But as you're aware, Sask Gaming Corporation had no revenue, and we had to backfill for a period of time. So those are the type of things that you would change the dividend policy as you go along. So it's relatively fluid. I don't know if Mr. Campbell wants to add anything, but it's based on the recommendations that come forward from the Crowns. I know that they have some discussions with the Ministry of Finance because, as you're aware, we're now in a situation where we have summary financial accounting processes. So a dollar of debt at a Crown is a dollar of debt for the province. It's you know, we're essentially one large entity. So we try and be mindful of the effect of what those things might happen. The two things we don't have any control over are market conditions, and that affects the approximate $1 billion in each of the Saskatchewan Auto Fund and Workers' Compensation Act, a market correction there can mean upwards or downwards of several hundred millions of dollars in a matter of days. Fortunately, in our time in government, anytime we've had one of those corrections, within a matter of months afterwards, it's not only rebounded but gained significant ground after that. But I remember the 2009 crash. I was away at the time, and I was phoning back, twice or three times a day. What's happening? Where are we with this? What are the risks here? What are the risks there? And I'm really pleased to say that we had good officials in the Crown sectors, good officials at WCB, Auto Insurance Fund, as well as the regulatory agencies with was at that time Financial Consumer Affairs Authority, and those people were working with credit unions, working with everybody else to make sure that we were in a good province to weather what was at that time regarded as an unprecedented storm. So anyway, those are some of the factors that would go into establishing a dividend policy. And given that it's taxpayer dollars and not our dollars, this is money that's owned by the citizens of the province, I think we want to be cautious and very mindful of the fact that a pensioner that's living on a limited income, seeing what's happened with their investments, they want to know that the investments that they have are wisely and carefully administered, that when dividends are paid, that the dividends go out for what they would regard as uses that they would expect, as in SaskPower's case, replacing aging infrastructure, or in Sask government insurance is paying a rebate or a refund to people that have paid it in the first place.
And maybe just to add to that, Minister, certainly the board's direction to us is that they want, long-term, sustainable, financially viable crowns. And so when you look at things like the dividend policy, you look at that we look at it in relation in part to what the industry metrics are in terms of things like debt ratios, right? What do other companies in those industries pay, and how much debt do they have? And that helps inform the process too. And then how much capital needs to be reinvested into that business for renewal, and are we investing enough on the capital side? And so we're in regular conversations with the Crown CFOs around what those appropriate levels are, and then, like the Minister said, we then liaise with the board in terms of what the appropriate targets are. So maybe I'll leave it at that, unless, Cindy, there's anything else that I missed in that?
The dividends flow out after you've made all of your other investment decisions. So you invest in your capital first. You look at the industry benchmarks and what a healthy, sustainable debt ratio is, and ensure that you've managed your debt appropriately. And then they flow out afterwards based on the capacity after those two things. And you look, into the future, as the Minister said, to see what the needs are over the next 3 years.
Job of looking after has been there for a long time. Some of her less inspired decisions were she urged one of her sons living in Ontario to purchase a Tesla and to drive out here when it was 40 below in a Tesla. With each successive charge, the range of the Tesla went down and down and down until it eventually had to get trailered to Calgary for new batteries.
I hope he was able to come through at least without an additional fee being added on by the Minister as he came through.
When they were done repairing the batteries in Calgary, they put it on a flatbed to return it to the owner. So he's staying with his mother in Lumsden, waiting for the car to doesn't come. Checks. They had returned it to his address in Thunder Bay, or no, Toronto. They found it in Thunder Bay. So maybe it was to avoid that fee.
I appreciate the information. It's pretty fluid in a way, or at least it seems to be that way, and kind of subjective, which is hard to kind of define exactly what that policy is. I appreciate that the explanation around sort of the capital program and the undertakings, and that this is after that. But certainly, I think you do see a trend, certainly, of debt-to-capital ratios within many of our crowns, pushing the kind of a pinch point at those upper thresholds. And certainly, we do know that the demand is significant in places like SaskPower, renew that power generation and that grid. And you know, ultimately it gets it comes at a cost to Saskatchewan people. And we talked before about SaskTel itself. And when we talk about something like connectivity, it really is more of a provincial project when we look what it's all about. And just to counter just a little bit of what the minister said about debt, and I understand summary financials very well, you know, whether it's a dollar that's, you know, on the crowns or it's a dollar over on the GRF, it's being added up to the total. But it is a different situation as to who's going to be paying that off. And if you look at a project like connectivity, just as an example in SaskTel, it's of course the cost is borne by ratepayers, and that's a different situation than you know, the debt carried by the province of Saskatchewan and the many different contributing lines to advance a project like that. And the risk, if you're not careful on a project like that, and if you're taking, I think, too much of a dividend, or maybe it's not appropriate to be taking a dividend right now to advance a project like that, is that you'd hate to ever price SaskTel out of you know, a competitive situation in certain markets. And so it's I think something important to observe. I am interested when the policy would have last been reviewed, the dividend policy.
So we generally review all of the major subsidiary policies annually, just to ensure that they're still relevant. This was last updated. Any changes to it were done in 2020, March of 2020. Yeah. The policy is available online on CIC's website, and I think the date would be right on there as well.
I think it's right for you to raise the issue of dividends and the ability of the Crowns to pay dividends versus reinvest money, and I appreciate you making the point. There's infrastructure needs will continue on, and I would not want to ever see that the requirement to pay a dividend would make it not possible to maintain or complete infrastructure, things that are there. And in some cases, we've certainly provided additional funds to the Crown Corporation from the GRF so that it didn't impact their debt equity ratio. So I think we always want to be mindful of what that is. And I'm going to let Mr. Campbell give some particulars as to what it is or what it has been. But the point you make is something that I think all of us want to watch, is making sure that dividends continue to flow, because those provide services for our citizens. But secondly, that we ensure that the Crowns remain well capitalized and that debt does not become a factor. But anyway, I'll let you speak to that.
The only other thing I would add, Minister, is, you know, obviously we track things like debt ratios for each of the individual Crowns, and we track that sector-wide as well. And so on page 49 of the 2021 annual report, you'll see the consolidated debt ratios for the sector overall, and it tracks it for the last 5 years, and you can see it's actually quite stable. So for as a sector in 16-17, debt ratio is 62.7%. It's 59.5% as of 2021, and so you know, over the last 5 years, debt has increased by just over 1.2 billion, but that corresponds with asset increases of just about 2.9 billion. And so you've seen a lot of that, what is incremental debt, being invested into capital, and the ratio has actually been quite stable overall.
Thanks so much. Has there been any undertakings to review the dividend policy approach by any external authorities?
The Sask CIC has got internal accountants, and there is an external accountant, I think it's KPMG, that we meet with at least quarterly, and they provide commentary on the financial affairs of CIC as well as the dividend approach that's being taken. They meet in camera with the board chair, and then meet in camera with the board itself, so that they're able to answer whatever questions are put forward by board members, and they express opinions as to what should or should not happen. And for the most part, they, as far as since my time has been there, they've been supportive of the direction and the advice that's been given to the CIC board by to the CIC board by the officials there.
Thanks for the information on those fronts. What's the external investment policy of CIC at this time?
Do you mean in terms of investments outside of the...
External to Saskatchewan, yeah.
I see. Well, really the big unique, obviously out-of-province investment always gets lots of scrutiny. I think, where you've seen more latitude on that would be in relation to SGI and SGI Canada. As an insurance company, of course, you want to have a diversified risk pool. And so that's where you've really seen the growth outside of Saskatchewan is with SGI Canada, who now has, a fair presence in Ontario, BC, and Manitoba and Alberta. And so, from my perspective, that's really where, there has been the external growth, but I'll see if my officials have anything additional to add.
The only other one I would add to that is SaskTel also has the ability to invest through its secure tech. They have customers out of province. Otherwise, there's been generally, restrictions on moving out of the province, focusing here and making sure we're supporting the economy in Saskatchewan.
Those types of initiatives would, come to the CIC board first for any discussion.
Yeah, no, I think it's important for these entities to be as viable as possible, and when there's something in our economic interests as a province, and for the ratepayers to have their interests advanced, it should be pursued when there's solid economic grounds. So certainly, expansions as we've discussed in SGI make sense. The government came years ago, shortly after your government came into office, actually, there was sort of this announcement that, it was not going to be, advancing investment outside Saskatchewan in the Crowns. And this, any of that always has to be done in an incredibly prudent way, and making sure that the benefit is derived for Saskatchewan people. Would the minister say that he's softened his, the point seemed to be a fairly hardline view that there wouldn't be investment placed outside of Saskatchewan, and to the detriment of Saskatchewan people if you're not able to pursue good economic viable opportunities that are going to return benefit. Would you see this as a departure from that policy? That policy's maybe evolved, and then is it sort of assessed on a one-off basis if there's an opportunity presented in the Crown sector?
I think the goal of the Crown should be to serve the people of the province and provide services to the people of the province. We're becoming more of a global or more of a national entity as a province, so it's appropriate to have some things that take place across different provincial jurisdictions. SaskTel acquired SecureTech, which had been a private entity before, and purchased it, and their monitoring station happened to be in Manitoba. So rather than say, oh, well, we're not going to do business in Manitoba, what are you going to do with the Manitoba accounts? It was a prudent decision just to carry on and let them do that, and let them grow out and expand for that. And I'm one of their customers, and it seems to work fairly well, other than for the times that I drive away without closing the garage door. But it's a good service and provides a good service to all of the citizens that are our customers. SGI has got coachman insurance in Ontario, and if you were to put the question to their CEO, the response would be to the effect that it spreads risk, that if we have a catastrophic event in our province by way of a major hailstorm, that wouldn't exist in Ontario, and we would be able to get a balancing or a trade-off on rates. So I think you used the word evolved. I think maybe just better defined. I don't think it was ever that there would never be any business out of province, but we certainly have got SaskTel and SGI now carrying on business in a number of jurisdictions, and we're supportive of the directions that they go to, and I think CIC is mindful that we're not letting them expand to an area where risk is posed. I mentioned earlier that the people of this province are cautious by nature, and if somebody else wants to build a mega company, leave it to the Jeff Bezos of the world to do those kind of things. I think here we want to take a cautious, careful approach where the Crowns continue to be focused on looking after the customers and looking after seeing to it that we get a reasonable dividend every year.
No, I appreciate the response. I think that the very simple approach that was taken on by your government, to not allow for that risk to be diversified or for economic benefits to be brought back to Saskatchewan people was a short-sighted approach. So I'm thankful that we have some examples of good, viable commercial operations that are bringing benefits back to Saskatchewan people, and those decisions should ultimately always be made in the best interests of of Saskatchewan people and bringing the benefit back. With respect to the previous CEO of CIC to the minister, why did he depart?
It's a personnel matter, and I wouldn't comment on it.
Are you able to share any of the terms of the settlement?
No, nothing that I would. Ultimately, you'll see what comes out when the appropriate pay disclosure. But at that point in time, I won't have any comment on it.
And so a cash settlement, if that occurred, would be printed then in next year's annual report, or it'd be in this annual report, or.
So that would show up in the pay disclosure report for this year.
Not the one.
The one that we issue. We issue a pay disclosure report each year for that would be for 2021, because it'll cover the end of the fiscal year ended of March of 2021.
So that'll be coming out in due time. Then that's.
Yeah, that'll be coming out over the next period of time.
Right. Okay. Is the government minister? Is the government planning on centralizing purchasing for the Crowns through the Central Purchasing Agency?
The Crowns have been asked to look at better ways to try and collaborate. Through executive government, there's been good services that were provided through central services, and the Crowns, I think, are looking at that type of a model where they would share some of those resources. I don't have any information as to where those discussions are, but those are the type of things that Crown collaboration might lead to.
Did the government, did your government contemplate this change through the 2020-21 fiscal year?
Which change?
The change to a more central approach of procurement within the Crowns, where you know.
I think those things are an ongoing process. I don't go to the Crown collaboration meetings, or not ordinarily. Those are operated by the CEOs, and they make their recommendations or come forward with different things that they've done out of them, and central buying or common buying would be an option, and I don't know at what level and for what items. We'd look to them for some guidance and direction. We think those are some things that should come from the Crowns, but I don't have any information as to when it was first discussed.
Maybe just to so the CIC Crowns at this point are not part of that centralization you're seeing over on the exec government side. I mean, the government can make a different decision in future, but for now that's not part of it. But the minister is correct in that through Crown collaboration, we're hoping to encourage the Crowns to collaborate in different ways in areas where they can do joint purchasing, as an example. But there's a whole other range of areas, and we've kind of hoping that the Crowns themselves will come forward with ideas in terms of whether there could either be cost savings through joint purchasing, or efficiencies through working together, or even areas where there might be not even cost savings at all, but service improvements to citizens or businesses through a more unified approach. And so that's sort of how we'd be handling those types of initiatives within the Crown sector at this point.
I know that our Crowns have incredible expertise built out in procurement, and have a lot invested in making sure that they have value for within their operations. And I would urge a high level of caution in going about any sort of a controlling exercise on procurement with these Crowns, because I think the expertise and the relationships and those supply chains and everything else are that. Just can't be underestimated, what's invested in those Crowns. So I just would urge the minister to, really make sure that the best interests of each of those respective Crowns are what's causing action around procurement policy.
I think we look to the CEOs for advice and direction, and it's good to see them working together, and it's good to see when a number of them come forward with a similar plan or a similar suggestion. So, point well taken.
Is there any policy around, and has there ever been a policy around board of directors for respective Crowns? I know certainly that there's important competencies to be, ensure are in place. What about where someone resides? Has that ever been a factor or a component of a policy?
Yeah, as you're aware, the Crown boards are order and council appointments. They're usually done on a recommendation that would come from our office through CIC, and what we're looking for is appropriate skill sets, so that each board would have somebody that might have had an accounting designation, possibly a legal background. Of course, you can never have enough lawyers on a board. Sorry, but we look for some of the appropriate skill sets, and in some cases where it might be one of the Crowns, there may be somebody that's got an industry background, and then we look for a gender balance, and then we look for diversity, and we try and find people with an Indigenous background. As you're aware, the chair of Sask Power is First Nations, so we'll we have First Nations people on a number of the boards and want to continue to grow that out. So and then we look at where the parties live around the province, so we've got a good geographic diversity. So it makes it somewhat of a challenge to find people that fit all of the tick boxes, so you can say every crown has got this, every crown has got that. When we formed government in 2007, we focused on expertise. A lot of the people that were there from 2007 have now termed out or asked to be replaced, and as that's happening, we're seeking a broader range of individuals to come onto the boards. We've made policy that we expect the directors to live in the province. We've had over the years some that have moved out of the province, and then as those ones are terming out, we're looking for in-province people to fill the gaps. Not saying we wouldn't take somebody from out of province or keep somebody, but by and large we think those people are representing a Crown board. They should have the benefit of being Saskatchewanians to try and contribute to it. So.
It's real important that the boards are representative of Saskatchewan people, and you talk about the makeup on these fronts. It's certainly not been the case going back in time. With respect to the residing out of the province, how many board members of the various crowns and crown entities would we have right now that would reside outside of Saskatchewan?
I'm aware of two. Both were residents when they appointed, and I think both are, I believe, living in Alberta. Do you know of any more than?
I believe that's right. We'll confirm that though.
When you're able to, that's good. What's happening with our crowns with respect to ECG, the environment, social, and governance reporting? ESG, sorry.
Yeah.
ESG. Certainly, I think SaskPower incorporates ESG into some of its planning. I think the question, relates to many of the other Crown corporations, SGI, SaskTel, others. How come that's not incorporated?
I think it's an increasingly emerging issue, and it's something that over the next year might become a bigger factor for CIC. Primarily, the Crowns are service vehicles, so the ones that you look at for what their ESG requirements are would likely be the customers, I've met with a number of the SaskPower, the larger SaskPower customers. All of them have got a strong ESG focus that comes not just from the individuals that we talk to, but from their board of directors as they are directed by their shareholders. So for them, meeting requirements on energy, on what the CO2 requirements might be, or what the plans are going forward, and it varies from customer to customer, but all of them are putting that out front and center as how they want to define their relationship with the utility provider. So if you're a major mining company or something, they ask the questions, okay, what can we tell our shareholders for where it's coming from? So those are increasing issues and will increase more over time. So the point that you're raising is there. A couple of our board members have suggested that should be a greater focus for CIC itself, and I'm inclined to agree with it. I have not yet had discussions with CIC about it, but it's certainly something that is rapidly becoming an emerging issue. Right now, the focus that we have on it is the part on emissions and what we're going to do to deal with carbon tax and maintain the ability to provide power as we go into an area where the use of fossil fuels is becoming increasingly limited and increasingly expensive. So I'm glad you raised it.
Maybe just to add to that, Minister, I think it is really a rapidly developing area, as you've highlighted. And I think on the it's an interesting question about how much commonality should there be across crowns versus, say, particular to their sectors in terms of what's sort of leading edge. I would say as the crown sector more generally, you know, we've been quite strong leaders in terms of a couple of those elements for sure around ESG. And obviously, just having Crown corporations with public policy mandates, there's a big social component there in terms of, you know, Indigenous business development procurement policy, things like that. The spend we do on community development and events has always been a pretty prominent feature across the Crowns. If you look at governance, I think we continue to have pretty leading practices in relation to how our Crowns are governed. And the Minister mentioned about some of the criteria we look for in board members. And if you look at the diversity profile of our boards, you know, since 2017, women have composed anywhere between 46 and 54% of our board members consistently over those 5 years. Indigenous representation has ranged anywhere between 9 and 11%, and percentages in terms of visible minority, again, between 8 and 10% consistently for the last 5 years, and that's up from previous levels. And so it's something that I think certainly from those components we've been quite strong. The Crown sector has been quite strong leaders on.
Thanks for all that information, and as well about the like when you're putting reporting requirements in place and governance pieces, that it is important to make sure that the respective industry that they're operating in, that there's that you have to understand kind of where the rest of the players are as well. It just seems that, you know, with respect to exposures to environmental risks and you know, potential impacts of climate change, that if you're looking at entities like SGI Canada or the Auto Fund or Sask Energy, SaskTel, I mean, the list sort of goes on, but it just seems that that this area of focus could be, you know, is likely very important if we're taking a long view of the best interests of Saskatchewan people as the owners of the Crowns. I guess to the minister, is there any timeline to when your government would or when the Crown sector would adopt ESG reporting for the Crowns?
I don't have a timeline. As you're aware, I've only had this file since, you know, less than a year, and as a result of the meetings that I've had with various customers, it's something that's becoming increasingly important to the customers, and I think should be important to the board members. So Mr. Campbell has just returned from holiday, so it will be on his list to have some discussions. But I'm sorry, I don't have a timeline I can give you, but it's important.
A couple other areas to maybe cover just our canvas just a little bit before our time will conclude here today. I appreciate that. With respect to the change in compensation for the Crown executives that were made this last year, were those changes brought to the board before they were, respective boards, before they were made?
No, it was not something that was driven by the boards. It was driven by CIC and by our office, and there was communication with the board chairs shortly before, and that would have been this was a direction that was given.
Did the boards express concern, sort of having maybe some of their duties overridden?
For the most part, not. I think one or two said, well, is this not something that's our responsibility? And we said, no, this is something that the CIC board has given a direction on, and that's their right to do that. And we've worked through those issues.
there been any legal undertakings or lawsuits or actions taken as a result of that change by anyone?
As a result of through any of the board members?
No, any, I guess maybe any other folks that might have been impacted by the changes?
I'm not sure of the status, whether there's any, and if you're talking about whether any employees have left, I believe there may have been one or two, but I don't have any information on that.
So one or two executives may have departed, is that the?
One.
Okay. A bit more of like just a specific question here.
An issue. Every year when the pay disclosure went out, the salaries, the benefits, everything are all disclosed in that. And when you look at what people in the province were typically earning, it was difficult to say to somebody that was a pensioner earning $40,000 or $50,000 a year and would look at a Crown executive that was getting more by way of an entertainment allowance than they were earning for the entire year. And we felt it was appropriate that the Crown employees be compensated adequately, appropriately, and fairly. But some of the add-ons, some of the bonus features were something that was, we felt, not something that the citizens of the province would be comfortable with. So early on, we made the decision that was something we wanted to make a change on.
Yeah, just a couple of questions around process there and consistency maybe in other areas of government as well. But with respect to a bit more of a specific question, because we have quite a few, different reports that are here today. So I'll drill down on a couple more specific ones from the, in this case, the First Nations Métis Fund. And as it relates to the $3 million investment made into MRL in 2011, do you know what the current values of the shares of Encanto are held at, what they were held at at the end of March 2021? And what the loss on that investment would have been?
Travis Massey is going to provide some background on this one, and I apologize for taking this long, but both Mr. Campbell and myself are relatively new on this file, and it was before our time. Travis has been around long enough that he'll be able to provide a bit of background and be able to provide the dollar figures that were being requested. So I'll turn it over to him.
So the First Nation Métis Fund provided a loan of $3 million to MRL, as you mentioned, Musqueam Resources Limited. The value at March 31st, 2021, because they took that money and invested in Encanto Potash, is $170,520. So when the initial investment was made, every year in the financial statements under accounting standards, you're required to look at the value, market value, and take those losses. So over time, all of those losses and potentially gains, if the price went up 1 year, would have been recorded in the financial statements. So cumulatively, since the investment was made, there's about a $2.8 million loss.
Thanks for that information. And what are the value of the Encanto shares? What can you report at this time?
They were about 7 cents per share.
Thanks. As it relates to the $1.2 million investment made into Force Energy Services, is it fair to say that the fund has no intention of collecting on that investment at this time?
With respect to those investments, those are physical assets and they're being held and will be liquidated at some point in time. And so we do intend to recover on those investments. The current value of those are about $144,000.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just noted that the note stated that there is no value that will be recovered, so I appreciate hearing that there's some value that will be recovered. Certainly there's significant losses in both cases here. Is there anything gleaned or learned from these investments, or anything that would cause you to change practice moving forward?
With any investment, care and caution should be taken. The First Nations Métis Fund was established in 2006 under the previous government to invest in First Nations or Métis-owned businesses. We supported that and believe that that's something we ought to continue. I think one of the best things that we can do as part of Truth and Reconciliation is economic opportunities for First Nations people. And in these were not all of them are going to be successful, as with any investment portfolio. But I've got a quote. The First Nations and Métis Fund is a welcome and much-needed source of additional financial support for First Nations and Métis people and businesses in our province. And that was a quote from NDP Minister Maynard Sontag, May 11th, 2006. And as much as I may disagree with his political affiliation, I think I agree with the statement that those are the type of things that we want to continue to do. And I think with any time there's an investment that did not prove a success in the long run, you always look at it and say, well, was the right criteria used? Was it overly cautious? But with a portfolio like this, there's certainly some element of risk in them, and I'm glad that there was a number of successes and continue to be, and would encourage our officials to continue to work with the various tribal councils and individual bands for investment opportunities.
Yes, certainly the aim is incredibly important in making sure that it's structured in a way that allows the portfolio to be a success and extends opportunities is very important. Moving along just a little bit to the Saskatchewan Immigrant Investor Fund, can you speak to the reports before us here today and those fiscal years with respect to losses losses of concern, or speak more directly to concerns with the Immigrant Investor Fund?
The Immigrant Investor Fund was started 10 years ago, and the fund was a partnership with the federal program, and the program was called Head Start on a Home program. And it was kind of a unique partnership between municipalities, builders, industrial organizations, and the province. There was 74 projects that were approved and funded in 19 communities across the province. $480.1 million in construction activity. The benefit of the program has been to Saskatchewan families in the province. 91% of the Saskatchewan families that bought a Head Start home were actually first-time home buyers. So in that regard, it's been a success. Not every project was a success, but the vast majority of them were successes. And I have a quote that I'd like to use from a person who I do actually regard as a really good friend, MLA David Forbes. And this is what he stated in Hansard, March 30th, 2010. "I'll celebrate when the 1,000th family moves into a Head Start home." Well, right now, 2,220 Head Start homes have been filled with Saskatchewan families. So I'm looking forward to David Forbes' invitation for the celebration. And because we're now over 2,000, I'm expecting 2 celebrations. So David's a good person, but he owes me. So they were programs that were intended to provide them, and there were certainly 1 or 2 of them that were not successful, but the vast majority of them did what they did. And when we see that the goal of the program was to provide homes, and that we've now provided 2,220 homes when there was doubts whether it would make 1,000. I would regard that as something that the province should be regarding as a success. But
thanks for the information. And what are the total losses cumulative to the end of this report?
So if you go to the March 31st, 2021 financial statements on the statement of financial position, the total retained earnings in 2021 is accumulative losses or gains. So we had about 788,000 positive retained earnings. However, there were losses that occurred in one development throughout all the projects that the minister had mentioned.
Value of the losses with respect to that development?
I'll have to dig through it. Just give me a second.
Okay. I won't have too much more here. You might get.
Okay, that's good. Because we got a lot of wind up.
an apartment complex in PA where the builder defaulted partway through, and there was a completion loss to the project below.
Total losses for that project were about $9.5 million.
Thanks for that information. And at this point, as I look through my notes here, I think we've canvassed most of the areas that I wanted to seek answers on here. So I don't have any further questions, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions and that we've reached our allotted time, I will now ask a member to move that we conclude the consideration of 2019-20, the 2020-21 Crown Investment Corp. Saskatchewan annual reports, CIC Asset Management, Inc., financial statements for the years ending March 31st, 2020, March 31st, 2021, First Nations and Métis Fund, Inc., financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020, March 31st, 2021, Saskatchewan Immigrant Investors Fund, Inc., financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020, and March 31st, 2021, Capital Pension Plan annual reports for the year ending March 31st, 2020 and March 31st, 2021, and the 2019-20 Crown Investment Corp. And subsidiary Crown Payee disclosures report. Do I have a mover? Mr. Darrell Harrison has moved to conclude the consideration of the annual reports for CIC. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business for today. Minister, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and the committee's members for their deliberation over the last 2 days. I'd like to use this opportunity to thank the building staff, the Hansford staff, building security, Ledge Assembly staff, and in particular the folks from Crown Investment Corporation that are here today, not just work for the work they did in preparing for today, which I think is a significant amount of work, but also for the work that they've done throughout the year to look after the affairs of the province. Mr. Speaker, I know that this is Stacey's last day in committee, so want to wish her well in her future endeavors. I know that she will miss the great humor supplied by Trent Weatherspoon and myself. So to you, we wish you well in the future, and apologize for having to put up with this.
Minister, I'll recognize Mr. Weatherspoon for closing comments.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, committee members. Thanks to the Minister for his time. And thank you to President Campbell and all the officials of CIC and all the important work that you're involved in, all of those across the Crown sector that are involved in doing the good work for the people of Saskatchewan and providing us a whole lot of value and benefit. So thank you very much. And thanks to all those other folks that make this place operate. But very specifically, it's a real, it's with sadness to say goodbye to Stacey Ursulescu from this assembly. She's served here for 12 years, since 2009. I've known her long before that. She's a remarkable person, and she's supported all of us in this assembly and its work so well over so many years. We wish you and Sean all the best in the years to come, and many, many happy adventures.
Thank you. Just and before we do close out, I'd also like to thank you, Minister Morgan, and your staff, Mr. Campbell, CIC, and the officials for all the hard work you do and being here today, and the various crowns that have been here the last 2 days, and their officials for all their hard work and presentation over the last few days. Thank you to Ms. Clement and her audit staff over the last 2 days of their presentations. And also, I'd like to thank all my committee members on both sides for 2 long, hard days of work. I thank you for all that you guys do. Thank you to Hansert and the staff in the building, and finally, a special thank you to Stacey Ursulescu. You know, I've had this position for a little under a year, and she's been here for 12 years, and for her to keep me on track as a chair, she must be one heck of a person, because I'm usually pretty hard to control. But I know this is her last week, and I'm glad we got this in. And just to show her efficiency over the last 12 years, I think we're caught right up on this CCA committee. And I just want to wish her the best in the future. And we'll certainly miss you. And if you're ever out this way, please stop by. Thank you. With that, I will ask a member to move the adjournment, a motion to adjourn. Mr. Jensen, Terry Jensen, has moved to a motion to adjourn. Is that agreed? Carried. This committee stands adjourned to the call of the chair. Thank you.